Yeah, and this is going to be even harder question for you, but I'm going to ask it. In a 7-game series between the Warriors and the Bulls, what do you think would be the biggest difference maker that would ultimately decide the series?
If you really want to compare the rosters, I mean, they would have more scoring punch. I mean, they would have so much shooting, so much ability to space the floor. I think the basketball you see now, I mean, the fact that it's, we're talking about 20 years in the future, I don't know that the Bulls would be able to score with them.
So Steph Curry's amazing, had 46 and the Warriors are 10-0. And so now everybody's going, uh-oh. Everybody, I saw a story this morning, everybody's putting up the 95-96 Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan, the greatest team that ever played, the most wins in a season, and they're now comparing the Warriors to that team.
Who would win, the 95-96 72-win Bulls team or this Warriors squad?
These Warriors would beat those Bulls.
Throughout the 2015 to 2016 regular season, the Golden State Warriors were endlessly being compared to the 95-96 Bulls, a team that is widely considered as the greatest in NBA history. At the time, the comparisons completely made sense. The Warriors were the defending NBA champions who were revolutionizing the game with their three-point shooting. Their leader was the reigning league MVP who was shattering records left and right for efficiency and three-point shooting, on his way to becoming the first and only unanimous MVP in NBA history. The team got off to a 24-0 start in the regular season, and that was without the availability of their head coach. This group seemingly had everything. Potentially the greatest backcourt in NBA history, with arguably the two greatest three-point shooters of all time. They had elite defenders in Draymond Green and Andre Iguodala, and a rich bench of talent capable of holding their own. They seemed utterly unbeatable, not just in their era, but in potentially all eras. And then the NBA playoffs happened, and I'm sure you all remember how that went. After an absolute dogfight with the OKC Thunder in the Western Conference Finals, the Warriors advanced to the NBA Finals, where they were eventually stunned in a Game 7 defeat at the hands of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now here's the thing, did LeBron James and Kyrie Irving perform at their best when it mattered the most? Absolutely. They deserve the utmost credit for the stretch they had during the 3-1 comeback that will ultimately define their legacies. But do I truly believe that the 2016 Cavs were the better team? I don't think I can say that I do. In the 10 years since, people have become accustomed to overlooking the 2016 Warriors. Because as the 96 Bulls always claimed, it doesn't mean a thing without the ring. The thing is, the 16 Warriors of the regular season were not the same 16 Warriors in the playoffs. Early in the first round against the Rockets, Steph Curry severely sprained his MCL, causing him to miss several playoff games. Obviously, there was an anxious urgency to get Steph back on the court as soon as possible, and Curry clearly wanted that as well. Although he would return in the second round against the Portland Trail Blazers, I don't think Steph ever truly returned to 100% health in that postseason. People have always countered this point of mine by mentioning how he set an overtime scoring record in his first game back. Which is true, but I never saw that as conclusive evidence that Steph was completely okay. After all, we've seen players perform at a high level while being injured. For example, Isaiah Thomas set an NBA Finals scoring record while playing on a swollen ankle. Michael Jordan and Dirk Nowitzki both excelled in the finals while being held back by the flu. And Kobe Bryant won a Finals MVP while having a broken index finger on his shooting hand. Even Steph himself has indicated that he never returned to 100% in that postseason, and honestly, I believe him. Because that's what I thought when I saw it with my own two eyes. His quickness and agility just didn't seem to match the level of his regular season form, and it seemed to affect his shot as well. This is backed up in the numbers. Because when you look at his stats before the injury and after the injury, they're not even remotely close in terms of both scoring and efficiency. Steph was the offensive engine of that record-breaking 73-9 team, and without him at full strength, the team simply wasn't the same. But the Warriors' hindrances wouldn't stop there. Without Curry at his best, other players were expected to step up and provide more offense. One of those was a 23-year-old Harrison Barnes. But the pressure of those expectations was not something that he had been accustomed to throughout the regular season, so naturally, his numbers plummeted during the postseason. Then, of course, there was the controversial suspension in the NBA Finals. In Game 4, Golden State was comfortably ahead, and was clearly headed to a commanding 3-1 lead in the series. That's when Draymond Green and LeBron James got into an altercation that resulted in Draymond getting suspended from an important 5th game in Golden State. This decision from the league office was highly questionable, considering the fact that Draymond had done worse things earlier in the playoffs and wasn't suspended then. This led many to speculate that the league office made this decision in an attempt to extend the series, thus making the league more money. If that was their intention, then it worked. Without Draymond's defensive presence, LeBron James and Kyrie Irving proceeded to score 41 points apiece in Game 5, which resulted in the Warriors getting blown out on their home floor. To make matters even worse, during that blowout, the reigning Finals MVP, Andre Iguodala, injured his back, which then tanked his minutes and production in the final 2 games of the series. That wasn't the only Game 5 injury though. The Warriors starting center, Andrew Bogut, also went down, as he hyperextended his knee, which caused him to miss Game 6 and 7. Without their big man down low, the Warriors were absolutely dominated by the Cavs in the final 3 games, in terms of the rebounding and in terms of the points in the paint. When you look at all the different factors that held the Warriors back, it's miraculous that they even managed to come within 4 points of being NBA champions once again. Unfortunately, we never got to see the 2016 Warriors at full strength in the postseason. But when completely healthy, this team might have been one of the top 5 or even top 3 greatest teams of all time. But because of a perfect storm of tragic circumstances, they will never, ever be remembered that way.
To Isaiah and his Bad Boy Pistons, I don't think there's ever been a more physical team than them.
Okay.
They impose their will on you.
Right.
They beat you up, man.
Right.
And if you flinched, it was over for you.
Right.
They could do things very few teams could do. They can be physical, and then they had that 3-headed monster, Isaiah, Joe Dumars, and Vinnie Johnson.
Right.
You couldn't do nothing
When Vinnie
with
got
them.
cooking.
And I'm not even talking about John Sally and Rodman.
They had Mahorn the first year, Lambert.
That's right. Was it tough to play against it? Of course.
Right.
But, give them credit. They won back-to-back championships.
Correct.
I never take anything away from a champion.
Right.
And so they proved that style could win.
Right.
And they won with it. And so give them credit. And they, to me, one of the greatest teams as well. Because defensively, I don't know if we've seen a better team than the Pistons.
Right.
So it's been a reoccurring topic on this channel a lot recently. Who was the deepest team in NBA history? I think there's a lot of solid candidates for that title, and please, let me know in the comments section below who would be your choice for that title. I don't necessarily know with complete certainty the team I would pick, but it seriously might be this one. I'm talking about the 1988 to 1989 Detroit Pistons. What's amazing about this team is not only are they one of the most overall talented squads of all time, but I would argue that they're one of the most overlooked teams in NBA history. We're talking about a group of players that nearly won 3 straight NBA championships, with one of the greatest backcourts that the game of basketball has ever seen. During their run of dominance, they were able to beat Magic Johnson's Showtime Lakers, Larry Bird's Celtics, and Michael Jordan's Bulls. Not once, not twice, but for 3 straight seasons, they eliminated the Bulls out of the NBA playoffs. I think the reason why this group is one of the most overlooked teams of all time is simply because they were not very liked in their heyday by anyone outside of Detroit, seeing how they were known as the Bad Boy Pistons for their dirty and physical antics, and that was a reputation that they reveled in. Not only that, but the Bad Boy Pistons are now treated as a footnote to the story of Michael Jordan's legacy. Now, were they an obstacle for MJ and served as a launching pad for his career? Absolutely. But they were also one of the most dominant teams in NBA history, especially in 1989. This specific group was led by one of the greatest dual-threat point guards in the history of the league, Isaiah Thomas. This guy was an incredible ball handler, an amazing facilitator, and a terrific scorer. he also had ice water flowing through his veins, as he was one of the most clutch players that the game has ever seen. Like when he dropped an NBA record 25 points in a single quarter of the NBA Finals, in a game where he ended up with 43 points. Isaiah Thomas was the kind of player who could drop 40 points in an NBA playoff game, and the next night, he could get you 15 to 20 assists, and no one would bat an eye. Alongside of him was one of the most underrated players of all time, Joe Dumars. This guy had a solid handle of the basketball and was one of the all-time great perimeter defenders. In fact, on multiple occasions, Michael Jordan has referred to him as the best perimeter defender he's ever faced. At small forward, they had a lethal scoring wing known as Mark Aguirre. Just before he had joined the Detroit Pistons, he was the leader of the Dallas Mavericks, as he was averaging nearly 30 points per game for that group. And somehow, similar to guys like Alex English and Adrian Dantley, he has seemed to be lost and forgotten in history, despite being one of the best scorers of his era. At power forward, they had the enforcer, Rick Mahorn, who was not just a solid rebounder, but a guy who was a major part of their physical identity. And at center was one of the most famous villains in NBA history, Bill Laimbeer. Despite his notorious nicknames and reputation, he was known in his day for being a lot more than just a mean player. Laimbeer was one of the first stretch 5 centers of the NBA. He was also a guy who was frequently among the league leaders in rebounds, and he was a fantastic passer, and more specifically, a fantastic outlet passer. Coming off the bench, they had several guys who were capable of being a 6th Man of the Year winner. The guy who was usually their 6th man was known as Vinny the Microwave Johnson. The reason they called him the Microwave is because of how quickly he could heat up, as he was a fantastic scoring spark plug for this team. The next off the bench was a back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year winner in Dennis Rodman. And at this point of his career, he was much leaner, but very strong and very quick. During his days with the Bulls, he was known for guarding guys like Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, and Shaquille O'Neal. But at this point of his career, he was more commonly assigned to guys like Magic Johnson, Scottie Pippen, and even occasionally Michael Jordan. Then their 8th man in the rotation was the 7'1" center James Edwards, who was a guy who averaged as high as 17 points per game during his career. This guy was a quality scoring option and would certainly be a starter on the vast majority of teams. But on this group, he was just their 3rd most important big man. And then the 9th man in their rotation was the 6'11" John Salley, who was only at the age of 24 and was in the middle of the prime of his career. He wasn't a star player by any means, but he always played with hustle, heart, and energy, and was a quality role player even though he was one of the last guys off the bench. As I mentioned before, this team was stupid deep and had basically everything on their roster. From scorers, to passers, to defenders, to rebounders, there was basically no style of basketball that they couldn't play and excel in. Throughout the 1988 to 1989 regular season, they finished with a 63-19 record. They swept the Boston Celtics out of the first round 3-0. Then in the semifinals, they swept a very talented Milwaukee Bucks team 4-0. Then in the Eastern Conference Finals, they took out Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen in 6 games. And then, against the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA Finals, who were previously undefeated in the Western Conference playoffs, they swept them as well, 4-0. Meaning they had a 15-2 record throughout the entirety of the postseason as they secured their championship. Not only is this team ridiculously underrated and overlooked, but they should even be in the argument for the greatest team in NBA history. The way that the passage of time has treated them is honestly a travesty. Unless, of course, you believe they deserved it for their antics on the court. And a lot of people would argue as much.
Even Ralph Nader says he wants to have like official inquiry into the refs. What do you guys think of that? You think the refs perhaps were not as accurate as they could have been?
Well, we really can't say too much about it, but other people seen what happened.
Now, that's
I believed that night when I covered that game here in Los Angeles that it was an abomination, that it was an embarrassment to the league, that it was the worst officiated contest in professional basketball I'd ever seen.
Tonight, a former NBA referee says the playoff series between the Kings and Lakers in 2002 was fixed.
We all said at the time, something's wrong here. The Kings were a better team, but that game was not right. I'm telling you, I was there. That was not right.
What do you think the public's perception is of the integrity of the NBA officials? 0.
The integrity of the game has been shot. What surprises me that the league doesn't do anything about it.
Chucky Brown put me, so like, Mike, you know, if they're bringing a certain crew, it's going to go a certain way. I was like, man, bullshit, man. It's the NBA. Ain't no way. We're up 20 points every game anyway. Nothing, even if they do, it ain't could stop.
Right.
And so just watching that, man, just seeing it, looking back now, that shit makes me sick, man, because I think that could have been our championship. And so, obviously, you've seen what happened in the game. But, I mean, we were definitely the better team that year. I know that for sure. But
in my 8 years of doing YouTube, this question has come up a lot from my viewers. Who was the greatest team in NBA history that didn't win a championship? To be honest, for quite a while, I had a really hard time giving a definitive answer to this question simply because there has been so many great teams in the rich history of the NBA. So how do you narrow it down to just one? But then I had this thought process. Yes, there are many great teams that didn't win, and many teams that came close to winning. But of those teams, there was only one group that I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt deserved to win the title, but was screwed out of it by corruption. Of course, I'm talking about the 2001 to 2002 Sacramento Kings. I imagine many of you don't need an explanation of what happened, but I'll give you a brief summary just in case some of you are unfamiliar. In the early 2000s, the NBA was still rebounding from a massive decline in viewership after Michael Jordan's retirement from the Bulls. One of the sure bets to get views and generate plenty of revenue for the NBA was Shaq, Kobe, and the Los Angeles Lakers. Later on in an interview, David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA at the time, was asked about his personal preference for an NBA Finals matchup, to which he controversially answered, the Lakers versus the Lakers. It made sense considering that this Los Angeles team was exciting, dramatic, and bolstered a massive market. On the other hand, there was the Sacramento Kings, an underdog squad that was lacking the dazzling names and flair of Los Angeles, while being represented by a very small market, with a stadium and Arco Arena that looked remote and desolate compared to the raucous city atmosphere of Staples Center. From a money-making standpoint, there was no question to anyone at the time which team the league office would prefer to make the NBA Finals. So when Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals happened, much of the sports world started crying foul. In that contest, the Lakers shot 27 free throws in the fourth quarter alone, compared to the Kings' total of 9. Every call was seemingly going in the favor of Los Angeles, and even some of the no calls as well, like this elbow from Kobe Bryant to Mike Bibby's face in the most crucial moment. Kings players, coaches, and fans were all appearing to be dumbfounded as the game flew out of their grasp. As you saw in the intro of this video, there was plenty of suspicion at the conclusion of the 2002 West Finals. But after some time, there would be some cold hard evidence. In 2008, Tim Donaghy, a former NBA referee who was guilty on betting on basketball games that he officiated, said that the NBA rigged the 2002 playoff series. Specifically, he said that allegedly, the league scheduled Dick Bavetta to officiate the 6th game, with an agenda to get the Lakers the victory. If that is indeed true, then he succeeded in his mission, and the Lakers would go on to win the series and easily win the championship in a 4-game sweep over the vastly inferior New Jersey Nets. So now you know the essentials of the situation, but now here's my perspective. My history with this team is actually a rather interesting one. For the entirety of my life, I have been a passionate Lakers fan. Growing up in Central California, I had plenty of friends who were either Lakers fans or Kings fans. The rivalry that developed was intense, not just between the teams, but between the fan bases as well. I hated this squad and delighted in their misery. So you can only imagine how happy I was when the Lakers defeated them in the Western Conference Finals. But in the years since, that positive memory has been growing more and more bitter. As someone who appreciates the history of the game and has made it my career goal to put a spotlight on the overlooked talents of NBA history, I've had to witness this former great Sacramento team fade into obscurity. In 2002, Chris Webber was in the argument for the title of the best power forward in the entire league. But you wouldn't know it, because in the years since, people only talk about Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki as the best power forwards from that era. Mike Bibby was the ideal co-star. He was a fundamentally sound player who was born for the playoff atmosphere, as he remained calm, cool, and collected under pressure. The acquisition of Bibby in the summer of 2001 was the move that elevated them from a good team to a team that was ready to win a championship. Yet with that being said, he's somehow become overshadowed to the other point guard they had before him, Jason Williams, as White Chocolate is more known today due to his flashy passes and his incredible handle. Then they had Peja Stojakovic, who was a certified sniper and a terrific scorer, and he was also without question one of the greatest perimeter shooters in the history of the league. Yet somehow, he's never brought up in that conversation in this modern day. One of the greatest wing defenders of that era was Doug Christie, as he should be remembered for his tenacity and competitive spirit, but he's basically only talked about today because of his coaching career. For a 5-year stretch, Bobby Jackson was arguably the best sixth man of that era. But if you bring him up today, many young people will say, Bobby who? Hedo Turkoglu was a solid weapon off the bench, and even Vlade Divac doesn't get enough credit for the role he played on this team, as he was one of the best passing big men that the game had to offer. Rick Adelman is certainly one of the greatest coaches in league history, but is almost never mentioned in that conversation simply because he finished his impressive coaching career with 2 trips to the NBA Finals, but not a single championship ring. One of the deepest and most cohesive teams in NBA history is basically being overlooked and forgotten in every aspect today, simply because they didn't win the championship necessary to immortalize them in that way. But, as we all know, they probably should have. Overall, their ball movement and team-first approach should be celebrated today on the same level as the 2013 San Antonio Spurs or the 1986 Boston Celtics. But they're not. So even with the rivalry and even with my dislike of this team, I've grown sympathetic. I recognize the injustice that was done to this squad, as they should be celebrated today in basketball lore. Let me make this clear. This team wasn't a fluke of a contender. This was a team who believed that they could win the championship, who prepared each offseason for Shaq and Kobe in the NBA playoffs. They won 61 games, earned home court advantage throughout the postseason, and were on the verge of putting an end to the Lakers dynasty. But within a matter of moments, in a pivotal 6th game, all of that was stripped away, as they were basically powerless to prevent it. In my opinion, the 01-02 Sacramento Kings are the greatest team to never win a championship because they more so than any other failing team deserve to be champions. My advice to fellow Laker fans is go ahead, enjoy the 2002 championship, and talk your trash, because that's what sports is all about. But when it comes to the 2002 Kings and their fans, always give them their respect, because that was truly a special rivalry, and if the allegations are in fact true, then it's honestly horrible that they couldn't get their legitimate shot at a title without outside influences screwing things up. The 07-08 Boston Celtics, otherwise known as Boston's Big Three, they adamantly won the NBA championship, destroying Kobe Bryant and the Los Angeles Lakers by 39 points in the 6th game of the NBA Finals. For Celtics fans, their championship is extremely memorable. For Lakers fans like myself, it's also extremely memorable, but for all the wrong reasons. The thing is, in the years since, Boston's retired stars continue to run their mouths about their success, as if they were a full-blown dynasty. It's so well known on social media amongst the basketball community that it's basically become a meme at this point. So now this team's success has become somewhat blurry when we look upon it in hindsight. Some now think they're not as good as advertised, while others still believe they're extremely underrated. So seeing that I have vivid memories of this squad and still hate them to this day with a burning passion, how do they stand in my mind among the great teams of league history? Well, for starters, let's take a look back at how that team assembled. The 06 to 07 Boston Celtics were a complete disaster. The team struggled with their chemistry, and thanks to Paul Pierce's injuries that caused him to miss nearly half of the season, they struggled to produce much offense, finishing in the bottom 3 spots of the league. They were a lottery team that finished the regular season with only a 24-58 record. Needless to say, Danny Ainge and the rest of the Celtics upper management were looking to make some major changes heading into that offseason. Their first big move was acquiring the all-time great sharpshooting star, Ray Allen, in a draft day trade. On paper, the tandem of Pierce and Allen made them a dark horse contender in the Eastern Conference. But it was their next move that truly shook the basketball world, as Boston pulled off a blockbuster trade, acquiring the former league MVP, Kevin Garnett. The day this trade went down, I remember telling my father that the Celtics were going to win the NBA championship. Defensively, they were the best team Boston had seen in decades, and they were suffocating their opponents on a nightly basis. On the offensive end, they complemented each other's play styles perfectly, and with Garnett leading the team as the emotional leader, a bond was formed between several veterans who were starving for a championship. They steamrolled the regular season, winning 66 games, which was the most that the franchise had experienced since Larry Bird's MVP seasons. At one point, the Houston Rockets were on a historic 22-game winning streak, where they defeated many of the league's strongest contenders. But it was these Celtics who emphatically put a stop to that streak, as they went into the Rockets building and destroyed them by 20 points, holding Houston to only 74 points on the night. The postseason would prove to be tough for Boston, as each of their 4 playoff series went to at least 6 games. But when it was all said and done, they ultimately prevailed as champions, cementing themselves among the great teams of Celtics history. It was truly the perfect time for these 3 stars to come together and succeed, as they were each now in their early 30s and just starting to exit the prime of their careers. The thing is, due to the fact that they were starting to show their age and the fact that they only won a single championship, many people view this team as a bit of a one-hit wonder. Some say things like they had the opportunity and seized the opportunity, but ultimately the squad wasn't good enough to win multiple championships. Therefore, they can't be considered among the great teams of basketball history. And let me be clear, this is a narrative that I strongly disagree with. I believe this Boston team was on their way to being a dynasty, but unfortunately, they ran into disastrous circumstances that were out of their control. To begin the 08 to 09 season, Boston looked like they were poised to repeat as champions and were once again crushing the league defensively. Unfortunately for Boston, 2/3 into the regular season, the Celtics' reigning Defensive Player of the Year and arguably their best player, Kevin Garnett, suffered a season-ending knee injury. Without KG available for the playoffs, Boston's championship hopes basically immediately went up in smoke. At the time of Garnett's injury, Boston was tied for the best record in the Eastern Conference, and regardless of the fact that arguably their best player missed 25 games of the regular season, they still finished with a 62-20 record. I understand that Kobe and the Lakers won the championship that season, but my feeling throughout that regular season was that Boston was still the better team, and that Los Angeles wasn't quite ready for their physicality, at least until they would acquire Ron Artest in the following offseason. So to recap, Boston emphatically won in 2008, and I personally believe that it hadn't been for Garnett's injury, they would have won again in 2009. As we all know, the Lakers and Celtics had their highly anticipated finals rematch in 2010, and the series went to a hard-fought 7th game where the Lakers narrowly prevailed by a final score of 83-79. But keep in mind, Boston starting center Kendrick Perkins went down with a season-ending injury in Game 6 and was dearly missed in the 7th and deciding game. Now before you laugh because it's quote, only Kendrick Perkins, ask any Celtics fan who was closely watching at that point, and they'll tell you about his value to the team. Perkins was Boston's starting center and had the best year of his career, averaging close to a double-double and 1.7 blocks in only 27 minutes per game. Not only that, but in many ways, he was the team's enforcer physically. Perkins was the kind of guy who would make you think twice before you attack the basket, and he had a significant impact on the game in terms of the team's interior defense and rebounding. Now with that in mind, consider how Game 7 played out in the absence of Perkins. Of all games in the series, no game had a bigger deficit in rebounding than in Game 7, and that advantage went to the Lakers. Kobe Bryant had his playoff season high with 15 rebounds, and Pau Gasol put up a monstrous 18 rebounds. Not only did the Lakers destroy the Celtics on the boards, but they also demolished them with the points in the paint. And both of these areas is where Perkins usually had a significant impact. When you consider the fact that this came down to the final few possessions, you realize that a healthy Perkins likely would have been the winning touch for Boston. Now, let's recap again. Boston won in 2008. An injury possibly kept them from winning in 2009, and an injury likely kept them from winning in 2010. This team had a very realistic shot at three-peating in their first few seasons together and becoming a dynasty. After that, the Celtics stars were in their mid-30s and had officially begun their decline, and the Big Three's Miami Heat eliminated them in back-to-back seasons from the playoffs. Now the point of this video isn't about making excuses for Boston, because in reality, conditioning and remaining healthy for the playoffs is something that has always been a factor for winning championships. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Big Three Celtics were much better than their single championship would indicate. They had the makings of a dynasty and were talented enough to do it, but when it came to injuries and the timing of them, they simply had an extreme case of bad luck. This is the reason why I don't have a problem with the Big Three Celtics gloating about their lone 2008 championship, because I truly believe that they were every bit as good as they think they were. It was three starving superstars coming together, working together, achieving basketball immortality, and they added to the legacy of one of the most prestigious franchises of NBA history.
As a team, that's the way we've approached this whole season, is that we're going to all do this together. And, you know, we're not labeled as a team with one great superstar. I mean, we just got a lot of guys to come out and play hard.
The 1999-2000 Portland Trail Blazers were a team in the truest sense of the word, and hard work was its calling card. The Blazers tied the second-best record in franchise history with 59 regular season victories and advanced to the Western Conference Finals for the second straight year. The talents were obvious, but many feared there was too much talent on this squad and that egos would clash. It couldn't have been farther from the truth, as sacrifice for the good of the team was a common theme.
It's because Kobe Bryant can't get in foul trouble, neither can Shaq. You know, the Blazers, they have 10 very good players.
One of the topics that keeps coming up on my channel between me and my viewers is who is the greatest team in NBA history that didn't win a championship. Now, there are a lot of great candidates for that title, and honestly, I could see my mind changing on that from a month-to-month basis, simply because the field is so competitive, and I can make a case for many different teams. But what I can say with complete certainty is that not only is this team one of the best teams in NBA history to fail to win a championship, but they also have an argument for being the deepest NBA team of all time. I'm talking about the 1999-2000 Portland Trail Blazers, a team that was extremely talented, but that was also surrounded by controversy. One of their more unflattering nicknames was the quote Portland Jailblazers, due to all the issues that they were having off the court. With that being said, this team was constructed with one goal in mind, an NBA championship. As the Shaq and Kobe Lakers were rising and ready to begin the start of their dynasty, the Blazers were positioning themselves to be their greatest challenger. For one, the size of this Portland team was absolutely insane, which made them the perfect counter for a prime Shaquille O'Neal. Arvydas Sabonis was 7 foot 3 inches tall, Rasheed Wallace was 6'11", Jermaine O'Neal was 6'11", Brian Grant was 6'9", and even their small forward in Detlef Schrempf was 6'10". Not only was this team extremely deep, but they were incredibly well balanced. Leading this group was a seasoned veteran coming off of 6 NBA championships of his own, Scottie Pippen. At the age of 34, he wasn't quite the same lethal force that he once was in Chicago. But with that being said, he was still a battle-tested point forward, and even in his advanced age, he played all 82 games for the Portland Trail Blazers. He was also second team all-defense and even finished 8th overall in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. He was averaging about 14 points per game, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists, while also having improved himself as a three-point shooter. Their leading scorer was their all-star Rasheed Wallace, who was quite simply one of the best back-to-the-basket players in the entire league. He was an incredible scorer when he chose to be, and he was usually their go-to option late in fourth quarters. His major weakness, though, was his temper, as he was one of the all-time leaders in technical fouls, and he always seemed like he was getting them at the worst time possible. Their starting shooting guard was the 30-year-old Steve Smith, who was second on the team in scoring, putting up 16 points per game, and who also played all 82 games that year. Steve was not only a great scorer coming off of his days in Atlanta, but he was also still one of the best three-point shooters in the entire league, hitting about 40% from distance. Their point guard was the explosive scorer Damon Stoudemire, who at the age of 26 had an endless motor and was a major spark plug for this group. Their starting center was one of the greatest basketball players, especially overseas. His name was Arvydas Sabonis. At 35 years old, Sabonis was not the force that he once was. But with that being said, he was still a key contributor for this group, was an efficient shooter, and was one of the best passing big men in the entire league. And all of that was just their starting five. The first man to come off the bench was the 6'10 small forward Detlef Schrempf, who was famous for his contributions in Seattle when they made it all the way to the NBA Finals in 1996. At this later stage of his career, Schrempf was still averaging about 13 points per game, and he was very well known for being a great spark plug off the bench, seeing that he had already won multiple Sixth Man of the Year awards. Then you had a 32-year-old point guard in Greg Anthony, who was shooting 38% from three-point range. The quality power forward in Brian Grant was 27 years old and gave the Blazers yet another solid body to throw at Shaq. The 23-year-old Bonzi Wells was a great perimeter shooter, hitting about 38% of his threes, and was also a great wing defender to throw at Kobe. And the 10th man in the rotation was the 21-year-old center Jermaine O'Neal, who would eventually go on to be an MVP candidate in Indiana. But in the meantime, here in Portland, he'd have to settle for 12 minutes a game. As it was mentioned in the intro of this video, this team was stupid deep, and they believed they had everything necessary to not only defeat Shaq, Kobe, and the Los Angeles Lakers, but to go on to win the NBA championship. They had a dominant regular season, going 59-23. They were a top 5 team in the league, both offensively and defensively. When it got to the NBA playoffs, it seemed as if they had no equal, as they steamrolled over Kevin Garnett and the Minnesota Timberwolves, defeating them in the first round 3-1. Then they gentlemen swept Karl Malone, John Stockton, and the Utah Jazz in the second round. Then they met up with the Los Angeles Lakers, where a gargantuan battle ensued. The Lakers actually got off to a 3-1 lead in the series, but that's when the Blazers showed their resilience and won games 5 and 6, forcing a 7th game in Los Angeles. I think at this point, many of you guys know how the rest of the story goes. The Blazers had a 16-point lead with the fourth quarter approaching of Game 7. Staples Center was completely quiet, as the momentum was completely in the Blazers' hands. But that's when the Lakers started to storm back. And everybody remembers Shaq and Kobe getting on fire, and the supporting cast of Los Angeles hitting all those crucial three-point shots. But what people usually forget is what happened to the Blazers, as they went cold. Ice cold. Not only did they fail to score a basket for about 9 minutes straight, but they missed 13 straight field goal attempts. By the time their best player, Rasheed Wallace, finally hit a basket, it was too little, too late, as the Lakers were on their way to not only winning the series, but eventually winning the NBA championship. This Blazers team was this close to winning an NBA championship, and if they had actually pulled it off, and not had their worst fourth quarter performance in their most significant game of the entire year, then I can only imagine how much that would have changed up NBA history. Imagine a universe where Scottie Pippen has more NBA championships than Michael Jordan. Imagine a universe where Kobe and Shaq have less rings than they actually do. And imagine the Blazers franchise not just being known for their lone NBA championship in 1977, but also having a second Larry O'Brien trophy thanks to their performance in the year 2000. Ultimately, it's a make-or-miss league. And unfortunately, the harsh truth is that going cold for a couple minutes can be all the difference from being a forgotten footnote in NBA history and from reaching basketball immortality. The 1985-86 Boston Celtics. They are universally recognized as one of the greatest teams of NBA history. Although the 80s were defined by super teams and rivalries, the 86 Celtics were never seriously threatened by any opposition that season. They steamrolled the league. Boston's starting five was one of the greatest ever on both ends of the court. The 6'4" Dennis Johnson started at point guard. Beside him was Danny Ainge at the two-guard spot. Then you had Larry Bird at small forward and Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish down low. Beyond their fantastic starting five was their depth. Leading the bench unit was the 6'11" Bill Walton, who was that year's Sixth Man of the Year winner. Then you had guys like Scott Wedman, Jerry Seasting, Rick Carlisle, Sam Vincent, Greg Kite, and David Thirdkill. Looking at the results of this group, we see that the Celtics finished with a league-best 67-15 record. They had the third best defense and the number one ranked offense that season. They beat teams by an average of 9.4 points over the course of the season. They dominated the playoffs with a 15-3 record, and they had that season's MVP, Larry Bird. Their head coach was Casey Jones, who often doesn't get enough attention for the success of his team. He took over the Celtics in 1983 and spent 5 years there. In these years, they went to the NBA Finals 4 out of those 5 seasons, and they won the championship twice. He had this team playing hard defense, and the chemistry was off the charts. Larry was basically their verbal player coach and leader. It's often said that groups take on the image of their leader, and in this case, it's very true. If I had to describe them in a word, I would call them unselfish. The ball movement of this team was incredibly beautiful to watch. Whether it was on the fast break or half-court sets, Boston was always looking to make the extra pass. Speaking of their leader, Larry Bird won his third straight MVP that season with averages of 25.8 points, 9.8 rebounds, and 6.8 assists on 49.6% shooting. This was not among Bird's 50-40-90 seasons, but he was incredibly close. Something that people often forget is how Larry was also a very capable defender who made 3 all-defense teams in his career. Their consistent second scoring option Kevin McHale also had a monster season. He was almost always a sure thing whenever he was in the post and had his back to the basket. He had an incredibly high offensive IQ, some of the best footwork in the game, and amazing length with an incredibly high release point on his shot. When McHale was in the post, his teammates often called it the torture chamber due to the fact that he was so difficult to stop. That season, he averaged 21.3 points, 8.1 rebounds, and 2 blocks on 57.4% shooting. McHale was also first-team all-defense that year. Speaking of defense, where they really stand out among the all-time great teams is their interior defense. Bird was 6'9", McHale was 6'10", and Parrish was 7'1". It wasn't just their height, but even more so, their length. We don't have a recorded wingspan for Parrish, but it looks like it was at least as long as his 7'1" height. McHale, on the other hand, had a freakish 8-foot-long wingspan. Assuming that estimate is completely accurate, that would give him the second longest wingspan in NBA history. Coming off the bench was another 6'11" big man, Bill Walton, who averaged 1.3 blocks and only 19 minutes played per game. Between Parrish, McHale, and Walton, you have solid rim protection for all 48 minutes of the game. This aspect was crucial to their success in the 1986 NBA Finals. The Houston Rockets were just coming off of beating Magic, Kareem, and Worthy's 62-win Lakers. Houston eliminated Los Angeles in only 5 games. With that being said, basketball is a game of matchups, and as good as the Twin Tower tandem of Ralph Sampson and Hakeem Olajuwon were, you're simply not going to beat the 86 Celtics with size, and Boston handled them in 6 games. One of the less talked about starters from the Celtics was Dennis Johnson. Dennis was the starting point guard, and over time, he's actually become one of the more underrated and overlooked players of NBA history. He was a former Finals MVP winner back when he won the championship as a member of the 1979 Seattle Supersonics. He was averaging 15.6 points this year with the Celtics, but he had got as high as 20 points per game during his career. Johnson's final All-Star appearance was just prior to the '86 season, and he received 5 All-Star selections in total. He was also the Celtics' best perimeter defender, who they relied heavily upon to slow down the great scoring guards in the league those years. He was second team all-defense that season, and in total, DJ received 9 all-defense team selections over the course of his career. He was also known to be a big game performer and had a smooth mid-range jump shot. You could say that their 6'4" shooting guard Danny Ainge was the worst player in their starting 5, but he was certainly far from a bad player. Danny averaged 10.7 points and 5.1 assists through the season, and he was actually very efficient in his contributions as he shot 50% from the field, 36% from three-point range, and 90% from the free throw line. Danny was also incredibly scrappy, he was a big trash talker, and one of the OG floppers of NBA history, which can easily be seen as a negative, but I can tell you as a Lakers fan who watched him play, there were plenty of times where Danny knew how to get under the offensive player's skin and would get the ref to make the crucial calls when they mattered most. It was super frustrating to me, but only because he was good at it. The Celtics were never seriously challenged in that postseason run. Despite a 49 and 63 point performance from Jordan, they swept the Bulls in the first round. After that, they easily handled Dominique and the Hawks in just 5 games. Then they swept Sidney Moncrief and the Bucks in the conference finals. As I mentioned earlier, the Rockets did push them to 6 games in the NBA Finals, but the Celtics got up to an early 3-1 lead, and the series was never really in doubt. What makes the '86 Celtics so dangerous is that they can attack you in so many ways offensively while being so versatile defensively. There isn't another team in NBA history that I could put against the Celtics in a 7-game series where I would feel like the Celtics wouldn't do well against them. On offense, they could run the fast break, but they could also slow it down and run things through the post. They could pick and roll you all day with their bigs. They could punish you from the outside with the all-time great shooting of Larry Bird, or they could simply run the isolation through McHale, which is always a good option. Boston natives know this already, but for the rest of you, it's important that you recognize the 1986 Celtics have a legitimate case for the title of greatest team of all time. The 1982-83 Philadelphia 76ers, sandwiched right in the heart of the Lakers and Celtics dynasty days, is one of the greatest teams of all time, and a team that some even consider as the best of the best. In the summer of 1982, the 76ers signed the superstar Moses Malone. He was in the prime of his career, coming off of an MVP season with the Houston Rockets. Waiting for him there was the lethal man known as Dr. J, Julius Erving. In 1982, before they had acquired Moses Malone, the 76ers were already considered one of the best teams in the league. They had won 58 games and pushed the Lakers to 6 games in the 1982 NBA Finals. They had come extremely close to winning the championship, and then they simply improved in the offseason by adding the league's MVP. A tandem of Dr. J and Moses is terrifying enough in itself, but they had much more firepower than that. 4 out of their 5 starters were named NBA All-Stars in that 1983 season. Starting at the point was the Hall of Famer Maurice Cheeks. The 6'1", 27-year-old loved the fast break, and he was an excellent facilitator and an excellent defender who made first-team All-Defense that season and a total of 5 All-Defense teams over the course of his career. More specifically, Maurice was one of the greatest pickpockets of NBA history and currently stands 5th on the all-time list in steals. Starting at the 2-guard spot was the efficient scoring shooting guard Andrew Toney. As a 25-year-old, he was in the prime of his career and put up 19.7 points and 4.5 assists on 50% shooting over the course of that season. At the 3 was the 6'7" small forward Julius Erving. He was 32 years old and technically just past his prime seasons, but with that being said, he was still lethal and one of the best wings in the league. That season, he contributed with 21.4 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 3.7 assists on 51.7% shooting. Their weakest spot in the starting lineup was at power forward. The 6'8", 26-year-old rookie Mark Ivoroni contributed just 5 points and 4 rebounds in his 20 minutes per game. But when you're surrounded by all-stars, I can understand why it can be hard to achieve nice numbers. Starting at the 5 was arguably the most underrated center in NBA history, Moses Malone. Moses was once again absolutely dominant that season, both as a scorer and on the boards. He put up ridiculous numbers of 24.5 points, a league-leading 15.3 rebounds, and 2 blocks on 50% shooting. He was also first-team All-Defense that year. Coming off the bench was their go-to sixth man, the 6'9" power forward Bobby Jones. He played 23.6 minutes per game that season, and his nickname was the Secretary of Defense, and for good reason. Bobby was a 5-time All-Star who made 11 All-Defense teams over the course of his career. He was so good defensively that season that Bobby made first-team All-Defense as the sixth man. Needless to say, he was that year's winner of the Sixth Man of the Year award. Between Malone, Maurice Cheeks, and Bobby Jones, the 76ers represented half of the entire NBA's first-team All-Defenders that year. Rounding out their rotation were additional decent pieces in Clint Richardson and Clement Johnson. With Maurice Cheeks and Irving, they were fierce in transition, but if they wanted to slow things down and run a power offense through Moses, they could do that too. Looking at the results of this group, we see that the 76ers finished with a league-best 65-17 record. They had statistically the 5th best defense and the 5th best offense that season. They beat teams by an average of 7.7 points over the season. They utterly dominated the playoffs, finishing the postseason with a 12-1 record, and they had that season's MVP, Moses Malone. Moses is still the only player in NBA history to win back-to-back MVP awards on 2 separate teams. This team was absolutely incredible and was clearly the best throughout the season, and they knew it too. Heading into that postseason, a reporter asked Moses how he expected his 76ers to do in the playoffs, and his response was, faux, meaning the amount of games they would play in each series. To say their confidence was high would be a massive understatement. A big factor of why the 76er team is so unbelievably great is because of the strength of their playoff schedule and how they dominated regardless of the competition. They started by sweeping a solid New York Knicks team in only 4 games. After that, in the Eastern Conference Finals, they had a meeting with the powerhouse Milwaukee Bucks, who had names like Sidney Moncrief, Marcus Johnson, and Bob Lanier. If that doesn't tell you how strong the Bucks were, consider the fact that this Milwaukee team was coming off of a 4-game sweep over the Bird, McHale, and Parrish-led Boston Celtics. Up to that point, the Celtics had never been swept in their 30-year playoff history. Despite the Bucks looking like a more than formidable matchup, Moses and the 76ers still dominated, defeating Milwaukee in only 5 games. Waiting for them in the finals was the defending champions and the team that beat them last year, the Magic Johnson and Kareem-led Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers seemed poised to be the resistance that the 76ers needed, but the truth is, absolutely no one was slowing down the 1983 76ers. In those finals, Malone absolutely destroyed Kareem and the Lakers, putting up 25.8 points, 18 rebounds, and 1.5 steals and 1.5 blocks on 50.7% shooting, and he was rewarded the finals MVP as they stunned the basketball world by sweeping the juggernaut Lakers. That 12-1 postseason run is still to this day tied for the fewest losses in NBA playoff history. This would be their only championship in the 80s as Julius was beginning to reach the twilight of his career. But as far as that single season, all the perfect elements collided to make the perfect storm, and the result was a team with a strong case for the title of greatest in NBA history. The 2000 to 2001 Los Angeles Lakers, famously known for one of the most dominant postseason runs in sports history, led by one of the most dominant duos ever, a 29-year-old Shaquille O'Neal and a 22-year-old Kobe Bryant. This was the closest thing we ever saw to a prime Shaq and a prime Kobe on the same team. This was the biggest moment of overlap of the greatness of both players. Shaq was still at the height of his powers as Kobe was experiencing his breakout season as one of the NBA's leading scorers while continuing to be an elite defender. Additionally, this Lakers roster was arguably their deepest of any of their modern championship runs. More often than not, starting at the point guard position was the experienced veteran Ron Harper. He shot about 47% and chipped in just 7 points a game, but his experience and reliable defensive abilities often go overlooked. The Lakers didn't have a star point guard, but people often forget how deep they were at that position because backing up Harper was Derek Fisher and Brian Shaw. Fisher was 26 years old, and although Harper started more games, Derek chipped in with numbers of 11.5 points, 4.4 assists, and 2 steals on 41% shooting. Whenever the defense would collapse on Shaq, which was basically all the time, Fisher was one of those solid options for him to kick the ball out to, as Derek shot 40% from 3-point range over the course of the regular season and shot a ridiculous 51.5% from 3-point range during the playoffs. Fisher was one of those guys who did all the little things well, whether it be hustle for the loose ball, take a charge at a crucial moment of the game, or automatically knock down free throws from Rasheed Wallace's technical fouls. Fish was the kind of role player that any team would want when the games mattered most. Brian Shaw was a large 6'6" point guard / shooting guard. Sometimes he would back up Harper and Fish, but he would also come off the bench for Kobe as well. Shaw was another reliable option for Shaq to kick the ball out to, as he too upped his game in the playoffs, going from 31% three-point shooting in the regular season to 35% in the postseason. Shaw was also one of the best lob passers in the entire league. Kobe would sometimes be on the receiving end, but he was more known for his connections with Shaq. The alley-oop pass from Shaw to Shaq was coined the Shaw-Shaq Redemption, in reference to the movie The Shawshank Redemption, which is an all-time great movie, by the way. Kobe obviously started at the two-guard spot, and this was the beginning of him torching the league. He had improved his scoring average by 6 points from the previous season, as he averaged 28.5 points, 5.9 rebounds, and 5 assists on 46.4% shooting. He was also second-team All-Defense that year. Starting at the small forward position was the 6'7", 31-year-old Rick Fox. He was a solid contributor, putting in about 10 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists over the course of the season. Forgive me if I'm starting to sound repetitive at this point, but Fox was yet another reliable three-point shooter for the ball to be kicked out to, as he shot 39.3% from that distance. Starting at the power forward was the Lakers' big acquisition in the offseason, the 6'10" Horace Grant. Horace was 35 years old at this point, so he wasn't what he once was with the Bulls and Magic, but he still chipped in with about 8.5 points and 7 rebounds a game. He also helped Shaq significantly with the interior defense, which was huge, considering how strong the power forward position was in the Western Conference at that time. Everyone knows about the guy starting at center, the 7'1", 325-pound Shaquille O'Neal, the most dominant big man since Wilt Chamberlain. Shaq was coming off of his near-unanimous MVP season with almost identical numbers of 28.7 points, 12.7 rebounds, 3.7 assists, and 2.8 blocks on 57% shooting. There's not much that I could tell you about the Diesel that you don't already know, but simply put, in many ways, Shaq defined that era, especially in the Western Conference. All of the contending teams were focused on acquiring big bodies to throw at Shaq in order to challenge his physicality, and yet regardless, Shaq still dominated playing bully ball. Filling out the roster was the 6'9" power forward, who was one of the most clutch role players the game has ever seen, Robert Horry. And then you had Devin George, Tyronn Lue, Isaiah Ryder, Slava Medvedenko, and simply the greatest dancer of all time, Mark Madsen. Looking at the results of this group, we see that the Lakers finished with a 56-26 record, which was the second best in the league. They had the 21st ranked defense and the number 2 ranked offense that season. They beat teams by an average of 3.4 points over the course of the regular season. They historically dominated in the playoffs with a 15-1 record, although they did not have that season's MVP, who was Allen Iverson. A few of these things are the reasons the 2001 Lakers don't get more credit in the case for the GOAT team title, because a 56-26 record is significantly worse than most GOAT team candidates. Plus their defense was in the bottom half of the league. And they weren't typically blowing teams out either, as their margin of victory was relatively pretty low. For example, the '86 Celtics, who I've already done a video on, had a margin of victory that was nearly 3 times that of the '01 Lakers. But to completely disregard the Lakers for these reasons could be something that's lacking a bit of context. The 2001 Lakers were coming off of a season where they had just won the championship. Watching most of that regular season, they often seemed complacent, and it appeared as if they were simply cruising through the regular season before they eventually turned up the intensity just in time for the playoffs. And man, did they turn it up. The Lakers won the final 8 games of the regular season heading into the playoffs. Combine that with their 15-1 postseason record, and the Lakers finished the most difficult time of the year, winning 23 out of 24 games. What was incredible about this team wasn't just the fact that they went 15-1 in the playoffs, but it was who they beat to go 15-1. This was at a time when the Western Conference was stacked with talent and powerful teams. They started their postseason run up against the 50-win Portland Trail Blazers, the same team that had pushed them to 7 games in the Western Conference Finals the previous season. They destroyed the Blazers, sweeping them in 3 games with an average margin of victory of 14.7 points. The second round was against their rival, the loaded 55-win Sacramento Kings. Well, despite the hype, the Lakers swept them too, winning by an average of 9.2 points. Shaq and Kobe's imprints were all over this series, as Shaq dropped 44 points and 21 rebounds in Game 1, and then 43 points and 20 rebounds in Game 2. Then it was Kobe's turn, as he dropped 36, 7, and 7 in Game 3, and 48 points and 16 rebounds in Game 4. Surely the San Antonio Spurs would give a greater challenge. This San Antonio squad was led by Tim Duncan, David Robinson, and Derek Anderson. They had finished the regular season with a 58-24 record, which was the best record in the entire league, even greater than the Lakers. On top of that, San Antonio had the best defense in the league as well. The Lakers were not supposed to sweep this team. But not only did they do that, but they absolutely demolished them with an average margin of victory of a whopping 22.2 points. Kobe was leading the way, averaging 33, 7, and 7 on 51% shooting. Iverson's iconic 48-point performance was good enough to steal Game 1 of the NBA Finals. But after that, it was business as usual for the Lakers, and this time it was Shaq leading the way, putting up 33 points and 16 rebounds on 57% shooting over the course of the finals. These were the averages of Shaq and Kobe over the course of the entire playoffs. You can argue who was Batman and who was Robin over these playoffs, but whoever was Robin probably put up the greatest playoff performance from a Robin in NBA history. After the season was over, everyone in the media was comparing this team to the '96 Bulls. Over time, people haven't made that comparison as much, since I think a lot of people have forgotten the context that shows just how great this team was. Ultimately, this Lakers squad had it all. 2 all-time great alphas, a collection of shooters who are surrounding stars that demand so much of the defensive attention, clutch performers with championship-level experience all over the roster, and arguably the greatest coach in NBA history. This Lakers unit would likely challenge any other all-time great team. When I say the 1989 Detroit Pistons, what are some of the words about them that come to mind? Intense, physical, violent, the bad boys? Those are some common choices. But what about deepest team in NBA history? What about greatest team of all time? Despite the unpopularity of those statements, there's actually more merit to it than most people realize. As much as me and my dad hated the Pistons in years past for, in my opinion, their overly physical and instigating nature, we've also never failed to recognize how talented, skilled, and simply good that team really was. One of the best collections of talent the league has ever seen. Leading the team at the point guard spot was one of the greatest ever at that position, the dazzling 27-year-old Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah was one of the greatest dual threats of all time, as he could beat you in multiple ways, whether it was as a scorer or as a distributor. You had to respect both aspects of his game, and he was incredibly difficult to keep up with, as he was also one of the greatest ball handlers of all time. Before Kyrie Irving and Allen Iverson were impressing audiences and confusing defenders with their incredible handles, that was Isaiah Thomas's thing. On the season, Isaiah averaged 18.2 points, 8.3 assists, and 1.7 steals on 46.4% shooting. These numbers were nice, but they were actually a little bit below his usual standards, and a big part of that was the fact that less was required of him this year, as Detroit was loaded with so many offensive weapons this season. Joining Isaiah in the backcourt was the 6'3", 25-year-old Joe Dumars. Joe, over time, has become one of the more overlooked all-stars of NBA history. He was just beginning the prime of his career and put up averages of 17.2 points, 5.7 assists, and 2.5 rebounds on 50.5% shooting. Beyond his solid efficiency from the field as a guard, he also shot 85% from the free throw line and 48% from three-point range. He didn't shoot many three-pointers, but when he did, he made it basically half of the time. Joe was one of the best perimeter defenders in the entire NBA, as he made first-team All-Defense this season and would go on to make 5 All-Defense teams in total. His defensive prowess was incredibly crucial to their success, considering the fact that he would often be the one guarding guys like Michael Jordan, Clyde Drexler, Reggie Miller, and Dennis Johnson. On top of all of this, he would save his signature performance for that year's NBA Finals, which we'll get into more later. Starting the season at the small forward position was the 33-year-old legendary scorer Adrian Dantley. He was productive for about half of the season, but after butting heads with the team leader Isaiah Thomas for some time, Dantley was traded for another star and a great scorer as well, the 6'6", 29-year-old Mark Aguirre. Mark had averaged 25 points per game in the 7 years with Dallas before he joined the Pistons, and although he was capable of continuing to put up superstar numbers, less was required of him on the Super Team Pistons. In the second half of that year with Detroit, Aguirre averaged 15.5 points and 4.2 rebounds on 48% shooting. Starting at the power forward spot was the team's enforcer, the 6'10" Rick Mahorn. From a scoring standpoint, he was certainly the least talented player in the Pistons starting 5. With that being said, he still had plenty to offer. He was one of the toughest and most physically punishing players in the entire league, and a solid defender as well. If a wing managed to get past his defender and attack the rim, there was a good chance Mahorn was the guy who was meeting him there and making him pay for it. The starting center was the infamous Bill Laimbeer, who I've said in a previous video is my choice for the dirtiest player in NBA history. From a quote from the legendary Larry Bird, he said Rick Mahorn would try to hit you on defense, but Bill Laimbeer would try to hurt you. The flagrant foul did not exist in the NBA until the 1990 season, meaning that up to that point, Laimbeer would get his money's worth for every foul he committed on the offensive player. Due to this, seeing Laimbeer in the middle of an all-out brawl was quite a common occurrence. With that being said, the physical nature of the 6'10 center is what he's known and remembered for, but beyond that, he's actually got a lot of skills on the court. He was one of the elite rebounders in the game and a former rebounding champion. Along with that, he was a pretty good three-point shooter and a solid stretch 5 option before it became popular in the NBA. With this skill set, Laimbeer would often successfully run the pick and roll and the pick and pop with Isaiah Thomas. On the season, he averaged 13.7 points, 9.6 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks on 50% shooting, 35% from three-point range, and 84% from the free throw line, making him a rare and extremely efficient NBA center. The starting unit was scary enough as it is, but coming off the bench were two men who were both worthy of being a 6th man of the year. The first was a man we know very well, the 27-year-old tenacious Dennis Rodman. In only 27 minutes per game, he averaged 9 points and 9.7 rebounds. He didn't shoot the ball much, but when he did, he made nearly 60% of his shots. His greatest attribute at the time was without question his defense. He had incredible stamina and was very quick, and would frequently make the offensive player uncomfortable. Despite the fact that he was coming off the bench, Rodman still made first-team All-Defense that season. That should tell you how good he was. The second guy off the bench was known as the Microwave, the 6'2" Vinnie Johnson. Vinny got that nickname because he was known to heat up quickly and score plenty of buckets in sudden spurts, which made him a terrific spark off the bench. That season, he put up 13.8 points, 3.1 assists, and 3 rebounds on 46% shooting in only 25 minutes per game. Rounding out the rotation were solid pieces like James Edwards and John Sally. When we look at the talent on this squad from top to bottom, you can see why I think they have a strong case for the deepest team in NBA history. They were led by the Hall of Fame head coach and basketball genius Chuck Daly, who famously earned his spot as the head coach of the Dream Team. Chuck displayed as a leader what the Pistons were all about, as he embodied their passion and intensity in his fiery coaching style. Although this unit was poised to win their first championship in the '89 season, it's worth quickly noting that had it not been for a highly controversial foul call in Game 6 of the '88 finals, known as the Phantom Foul, then these Pistons may have been entering the '89 season as the defending champions. But that's for another video, so let's continue. Looking at the results of this group over the 1989 season, we see that the Pistons finished with a league-best 63-19 record. They statistically had the 3rd best defense and the number 7th ranked offense that season. They beat teams by an average of 5.8 points over the season. They dominated the playoffs with a 15-2 record, although they did not have that season's MVP, who was Magic Johnson. This Detroit team played an unselfish style of basketball where everyone contributed and made the extra pass. They had 5 players who averaged double-digit scoring, and defensively, they worked as a unit as well. What really makes this team stand out wasn't just their unique style and intensity, it wasn't just their level of talent on paper or their unity as a group, but in large part, it was because of how they dominated the postseason and who they dominated. They swept the Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish-led Boston Celtics in the first round. Then in the semifinals, they swept the Ricky Pierce and Sidney Moncrief-led Milwaukee Bucks. In the Eastern Conference Finals, they beat Jordan, Pippen, and the Chicago Bulls in 6 games. Waiting for them in the NBA Finals was the team that defeated them last year, the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers, who were actually seeking their 3rd straight title, led by the MVP, Magic Johnson. The Lakers had also gone a perfect 11-0 through the Western Conference playoffs, so at the very least, another long, hard-fought series was expected between these two juggernauts. But that didn't happen. Joe Dumars led the way as they convincingly swept the Lakers in 4 games to secure their first ever NBA championship, which many people think should have come 1 year earlier. Dumars was the finals MVP, putting up numbers of 27.3 points and 6 assists on 57.6% shooting. It is important to note that Magic Johnson did injure his hamstring in the 3rd quarter of Game 2, so the Lakers might have posed a greater threat if that had not occurred. Regardless, this was an all-time great team that would go on to win the title again the following year. Detroit had the players, skill sets, and talent to be an elite team in any era under any rules of basketball. But if you play by their rules, you're going to be hard-pressed to find any team who could beat the 1989 Detroit Pistons. the 1971-72 Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers organization has a long, rich history of success and have had several teams with a worthy argument for the title of greatest team of all time. As good as the Shaq and Kobe Lakers were, and the Showtime Lakers of the 80s, there's a strong likelihood that the first Los Angeles championship team might have been the greatest of them all. To start the season, the Lakers had the 6'3" Jerry West starting at point guard, the 6'1" and underrated Gil Goodrich was starting at shooting guard, Elgin Baylor was at the 3 spot, the 6'7" Happy Hairston was at the 4, and the dominant Wilt Chamberlain was starting at center. Rounding out the roster was guys like Jim McMillan, Keith Erickson, Flynn Robinson, Leroy Ellis, Pat Riley, John Trapp, and Jim Clemens. Heading into this season, this team was not expected to be as good as they would be. In the past few years, they had come close to winning the NBA championship multiple times, but they couldn't get it done. They had been dealing with numerous injuries, and on top of that, their best players seemed as if they were past their glory days, as Jerry West was 33, Wilt Chamberlain was 35, and Elgin Baylor was 37 years old. On top of all of this, they were entering this season with their third coach in only 4 years. It appeared as if their championship window had completely shut. But the new coach would soon change that perception. Bill Sharman was a former Boston Celtic who several of the Lakers players competed against while he played in the NBA. Sharman's emphasis on team play and fast break basketball would do wonders for this group. He came in with high expectations and a fierce work ethic and quickly changed the culture for the Lakers. Many of the Lakers players said that those preseason workouts were the toughest workouts they've ever been a part of. He had the team in great shape and the focus continued to be on transition basketball. At this point, Wilt Chamberlain's days of averaging 50 points were well behind him, and instead, Sharman had Wilt focusing more on a team game, which ended up fitting perfectly with this new Lakers offense. In years past, typically teams with Wilt Chamberlain didn't run the fast break much because although Wilt would secure the rebound, his teammates would wait for him to get up the court so they could feed him the ball down low, since he was the focal point of their offense. But now, Wilt was used to get the fast break started with his amazing rebounding and his elite outlet passing, as he then relied offensively on his other Laker weapons. Along with those key aspects of his contributing was Wilt's all-time great rim protection. Wilt stood 7 foot 1 inches tall and had a 7 foot 8 inch wingspan, which he used to its fullness all season long to shut down the opposing teams in the paint. On the season, Wilt averaged 14.8 points, 19.2 rebounds, and 4 assists on 65% shooting. Unfortunately, blocked shots were not tracked until a later date, but I'm sure Wilt would have averaged a ton of them. For this new offense, Sharman wanted Jerry West to play more as the floor general and be the team's main facilitator. It translated to West averaging a career high and leading the league with 9.7 assists per game that season. He also averaged 25.8 points and 4.2 rebounds on 47.7% shooting. Despite all the scoring from West, he was actually not the team's leading scorer that season. That honor went to the underrated legend I mentioned earlier, their starting shooting guard Gil Goodrich. This was Gil's breakout season as he was the main beneficiary of West's new role as a distributor in transition. Gil played all 82 games that season and averaged 25.9 points, 4.5 assists, and 3.6 rebounds on 48.7% shooting. Despite a solid game plan and coaching scheme, after 9 games into the regular season, the Lakers were off to a bumpy 6-3 start, as they hadn't quite played the fast-paced transition basketball that Sharman had envisioned. A major part of that was Elgin Baylor's age and his deteriorating knees. He couldn't quite keep up with the quickness of the rest of the Lakers' offense. Sharman approached Baylor about a reduced role where he could come off the bench and allow younger players to get his starting minutes. But instead, Baylor recognized this as a sign that he couldn't play the game as well as he wanted to, and decided to retire on the spot just 9 games into the season. Losing one of the greatest players the game has ever seen might initially seem like a detriment to the team, but it was actually quite the opposite on a historic level. Replacing Baylor at the starting small forward position was the 6'5", 23-year-old Jim McMillan, who with his coast-to-coast scoring abilities was more than happy to help push the tempo of the Lakers' offense. He also revealed himself to be a reliable wing defender. Now with the perfect nucleus to execute the game plan as intended, the Lakers weren't just rolling, they were steamrolling the competition. Immediately after the departure of Baylor, the Lakers went on their legendary winning streak. The previous record for the most consecutive wins was at 20 games, and the Lakers would make that streak look laughable. Los Angeles went through the entire months of November and December without losing a single game. They set the new NBA record at 33 straight wins, an astonishing feat that still stands to this day. Their streak was snapped by Kareem, Oscar Robertson, and the defending champion Milwaukee Bucks, keeping the suspense that Milwaukee still might eliminate the Lakers once again in the playoffs. The Lakers continued their dominance throughout the regular season and were hitting their stride again just in time for the playoffs. Just a week before the postseason was set to begin, they defeated the 51-win Warriors by a ridiculous 63 points. They finished the regular season with a 69-13 record, which was an NBA record for a couple decades afterwards. Into the playoffs now, and they came out of the gate strong, sweeping the 57-win Chicago Bulls in 4 games, and it was the Laker backcourt that led the way, as Goodrich and West each averaged an efficient 28.5 points per game. The next series was a matchup with the 63-win and defending champion Milwaukee Bucks. Despite the star power and championship experience on that Bucks squad, the Lakers group was still ultimately too much, as they beat the Bucks in 6 games. The NBA Finals was more of the same, as they comfortably beat the New York Knicks in only 5 games. Goodrich led the team in scoring that series with 25.6 points, but it was Wilt Chamberlain who took home the Finals MVP, putting up 19.4 points and 23.2 rebounds on 60% shooting. Looking at the results of this group over the 1972 season, we see that the Lakers finished with a record-setting 69-13 record. They statistically had the second best defense and easily had the best offense overall that season. They beat teams by an incredible average of 12.3 points per game over the course of the season, which is easily the best margin of victory of all the teams in the GOAT series so far. They dominated the playoffs with a 12-3 record, although they did not have that season's MVP, who was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. To say the Lakers simply dominated the rest of the league this season would be a significant understatement. Along with their record win streak and their record win total, they also led the league in points, rebounds, and assists, and they scored at least 100 points in 81 out of the 82 regular season games. The 72 Lakers were the perfect storm of talent, experience, coaching, and chemistry that led them to have a legitimate case for the title of greatest team of all time. The 2016-17 Warriors, who have an incredibly strong case for the title of greatest team in NBA history. More often than not, they felt simply unfair. They were coming off of a 2016 campaign where they had the greatest regular season of all time at a record of 73-9 that ended with an incredible disappointment, losing Game 7 of the NBA Finals in its last moments. They simply improved in the offseason by replacing their small forward who shot a repulsive 34% in the playoffs with a former MVP winner in the prime of his career. The championship was theirs the day they signed Kevin Durant. I even said so on Facebook the day of. I'm not looking for kudos here, I'm just pointing out that it was that obvious. Part of the recruitment pitch to Kevin Durant came from the great Jerry West, who told Kevin, "Imagine all of the open looks you'll get if you sign with us." Jerry was correct. It was a luxury for Kevin Durant to play alongside of 2 of the greatest shooters of all time, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Due to this, Durant's 2017 campaign easily became the most efficient season from the field of his career. But enough about just the addition of Durant. Let's get into the roster as a whole. Starting at the point guard position was the defending unanimous MVP Steph Curry, whose numbers took a slight dip when having to share the load with the newly acquired Kevin Durant. But Steph still averaged 25.3 points, 6.6 assists, and 4.5 rebounds on 46.8% shooting. He also shot 41.1% from 3 on a league-leading 10 3-point attempts per game. You know what you're getting from Steph, the league's greatest shooter with limitless range, who's incredibly difficult to defend considering how much he moves and plays without the basketball. The way he demands constant attention and spaces the defense naturally makes the offense easier for everyone on his team, including Klay Thompson, who was the starting shooting guard and who also shot 41% from 3-point range. As many of you know, it wasn't just Klay's ability to shoot that made him stand out, but he was also a terrific on-ball defender. As the ultimate 3-and-D type of guy, Klay had an excellent season with career-high scoring numbers of 22.3 points, 3.7 rebounds, and 2.1 assists on 46.8% shooting. Kevin Durant was at the small forward position and made one of the most seamless transitions a superstar has ever made into a new offense. The 7-foot sniper put up his usual fantastic numbers of 25, 8, and 5 on 53.7% shooting. Although he started at the small forward position, thanks to his length and defensive IQ, the Warriors were actually able to move him to the power forward position when using what they called their death lineup. Durant's interior defense was a major part of why the small ball approach was able to work so well, as he averaged a career high in blocks up to that point at 1.6 per game. KD provided all of this on a personal career low of 33.4 minutes per game. He was able to play so few minutes and reserve himself for the playoffs largely because of how the Warriors were simply blowing teams out with their overwhelming talent, and as a result, he often didn't have to play much of the fourth quarter. Assisting him defensively was their starting power forward and their center in the death lineup, Draymond Green. Draymond's usual contributions were seen on pretty much every area on the stat sheet, as he was widely seen as the team's anchor on both the offensive and defensive end of the court. On offense, he worked as one of the team's main facilitators and actually led all of the Warriors in assists. On defense, he was an absolute dog, harassing the opposing team, leading the league in steals, he was top 15 in blocks, and he was that season's Defensive Player of the Year. At one point, Draymond actually became the first player in NBA history to get a triple-double without scoring 10 points, when he had 11 rebounds, 10 assists, and 10 steals against the Memphis Grizzlies. Starting at the center position was the 6'11 Zaza Pachulia, who wasn't anything too special, but he was a big who could set screens, make the extra pass, and fit within the team's unselfish offense. With that being said, regardless of the fact that he was the starter, Zaza still played in only 18.1 minutes per game, and that in large part was because of their death lineup, which instead featured more of Andre Iguodala, who was a solid wing with experience, who could help facilitate, and was a reliable wing defender down the stretch of games. Contributing off the bench were decent pieces like Ian Clark, Sean Livingston, David West, and JaVale McGee. There was no shortage of ways that this group could attack you. They could suffocate you defensively, they could shoot the lights out from deep, they could punish you in the mid-range, they could push the tempo, they could execute in half-court sets, they could lose you with their incredible ball movement, and they could beat you with isolation plays. It's almost as if no game plan could work against this unit. Looking at the results of this group over the 2017 season, we see that the Warriors finished with a league-best 67-15 record. They statistically had the second-best defense and had easily the best offense overall that season. They beat teams by an incredible average of 11.6 points over the course of the regular season, which is the fourth highest margin of victory in NBA history. They absolutely dominated the playoffs with a record-setting 16-1 record, although they did not have that season's MVP, who was Russell Westbrook. This Warriors unit did absolutely everything well, and when I say everything, I mean literally everything on the court. They were obviously assassins from three-point distance throughout the season, including one performance where 4 different players hit at least 4 3-point shots, making them the first team to ever achieve that feat. They had incredible ball movement and frequently made the extra pass, as they averaged 30.4 assists in the regular season, which was the 5th highest in NBA history. In the playoffs, Golden State had 7 games where they had at least 30 assists as a team. The rest of the playoff teams combined could only match the Warriors' 7 games with at least 30 assists. Not only were they playing a team-oriented style of basketball, but it was smart and clean basketball as well. In franchise history, the fewest turnovers in an NBA playoff game was just 7 turnovers. The Warriors not only tied that record, but they did it 3 separate times in this postseason alone. In the regular season, they beat teams by at least 40 points on 3 separate occasions, which is tied for the most in league history. Embarrassing the opponent was a constant for this group, even throughout the playoffs. They swept the Portland Trail Blazers in the first round, they swept the Utah Jazz in the second round, and they swept the San Antonio Spurs in the Western Conference Finals. Throughout the West playoffs, they beat teams by an average of 16.3 points, which is the greatest deficit of all time. In the NBA Finals against LeBron and the Cavaliers, they continued to handle their business. They went up 3-0 in the series before finally losing their first game in their postseason run. Their 15 straight playoff victories is once again the most in NBA history. There's no other way to say it. The amount of records that this team broke in just one season is absolutely astonishing. If I'm being honest, in a way, I think this team has been taken for granted. Yes, Kevin Durant made a free agency decision that many people viewed as weak and tons of basketball fans didn't appreciate. And I also recall that throughout the postseason, they dominated to such an extent that most fans in the NBA community were calling those playoffs boring. And because of these aspects, I don't think the 2017 Warriors are remembered as fondly as many other great teams of years past. But even if there is some truth to that, Being completely objective, you can't deny the fact that the 2017 Warriors provided some of the most quality, beautiful, and excellent basketball ever displayed on the court. The 2012 to 2013 Miami Heat, the championship apex of the Big Three super team. It's easy to simply remember this team for the dominance of their 3 stars, but in this season especially, they were so much more than just that. They had depth, shooting, a great coach, and a defensive mindset that made them difficult on both ends of the court. Starting at the point guard position was the 6'2" Mario Chalmers. He certainly wasn't one of the stars that made this group a super team, but he was a key piece nonetheless, as he put up over 8 points, 3 assists, and 1.5 steals on 43% shooting in 26 minutes per game. He was also one of their reliable floor spreaders, as he had a career year shooting 40.9% from three-point range. At the shooting guard spot was the dynamic Dwayne Wade, who wasn't quite in his prime anymore, but was still one of the best at his position, as he averaged about 21, 5, 5, and 2 steals on 52.1% shooting. Wade, as usual, was elite on both sides of the basketball, as he was well above league average in steals and blocks among guards. Starting at small forward was arguably the greatest version of LeBron James we've ever seen in an obvious MVP campaign. At this point in his career, he had the perfect blend of experience, maturation, athleticism, and confidence, as he was now the clear leader of this team. This was also a career year on the defensive end of the floor, as he finished second overall in the Defensive Player of the Year race, and many think he should have won the award this year over the Grizzlies' Marc Gasol. LeBron put up his typical stat line of 26.8 points, 8 rebounds, 7.3 assists, and 1.7 steals on an unbelievable 56.5% shooting. That level of efficiency from the field is impressive for a center, but for a small forward, it's basically unheard of. This was also the best year of his career from three-point range, as he shot an elite 40.6% from that distance. It was an all-time great season in terms of superstar efficiency. At one point, LeBron had 6 straight games where he scored at least 30 points while shooting at least 60% from the field. That's the longest streak in NBA history. Quality shot selection and efficiency wasn't just a trait from LeBron this season, but it pretty much summed up the team as a whole, and all 3 of their superstars had their best or their second best season in terms of efficiency. That's one of the luxuries of playing alongside of other superstars. You get much cleaner looks. Starting at power forward was the 6'8" Udonis Haslem, who certainly wasn't putting up monstrous stats, but he did provide toughness and veteran leadership. As I mentioned earlier, this Heat team was very deep, and with Haslem's 19 minutes per game, he was typically one of the first guys to head to the bench. More on the bench unit in a moment. But starting at center was the 6'11" Chris Bosh, who tended to be in the shadow of LeBron and Wade, but his contribution was vital to their success, as he put up 16.6 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 1.4 blocks on a career-best 53.5% from the field. One of the first players to come off the bench was the 37-year-old Ray Allen, who was enjoying his first season with Miami. Even in his old age, he was still one of the greatest threats among role players, as he led everyone outside of the Big Three in scoring, with numbers of 10.9 points, 2.7 assists, and 1.7 rebounds on 41.9% shooting. He was doing his usual thing from three-point range, as he shot 41.9% from that distance. Believe it or not, he actually wasn't the team's best three-point shooter throughout the regular season though. That honor would go to the 6'8" small forward Shane Battier, who averaged about the same amount of minutes as Allen, but also shot more three-point attempts on 43% from three-point range. Rounding out the roster were quality pieces like Norris Cole, Chris Birdman Anderson, Mike Miller, and Rashard Lewis. With a multitude of quality wings on this team, the 2013 Miami Heat became famous for using what they called positionless basketball, where they would use an unorthodox group of players, which traditionally might not seem like a very successful method, but they were quick to prove that wrong, and in a major way. During one large stretch of the season, the team got so hot that they went on an absolutely historic winning streak, as everyone was hitting on all cylinders. Miami won 27 straight regular season games, which is the second longest streak of all time, behind the 1972 Lakers, who won 33 straight, and who we covered earlier in this series. To put 27 straight games in perspective, that means Miami went from February 3rd to March 26th without losing a single game. One strong advantage about this team that's worth mentioning is how their core was relatively young, and overall they had great stamina and endurance. One good way to measure that is how well the team does on the second night of back-to-backs, and this team was literally the greatest ever in that area. Throughout the regular season, on the second night of back-to-backs, they had a record of 15-1, which is tied for the best record in NBA history. When we look back on the glory days of this team, it's easy to simply look at the slashers in Dwayne Wade and LeBron James. But collectively, they were absolutely dangerous from the perimeter, as the Heat had 5 guys who shot at least 3 3-point attempts per game, while shooting at least 40% from that distance, which was LeBron, Mario Chalmers, Ray Allen, Shane Battier, and Mike Miller. Looking at the results of this group over the 2013 season, we see that the Heat finished with a league-best 66-win season. They statistically had the 9th best defense and the 2nd best offense overall that season. They beat teams by an average of 7.8 points over the course of the year. They went through the playoffs with a 16-7 record on their way to the championship, and they had that season's MVP, who was LeBron James. Through the East playoffs, they swept the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round, comfortably dismantled the Bulls in the second round, and then eliminated the Pacers in the East Finals in 7 games. The NBA Finals were an absolute classic, which included maybe the most clutch shot in basketball history when Ray Allen did what he was brought on to do and hit a big 3 to extend the series, before Miami eventually won in the 7th game. If San Antonio had won, then their 2013 squad may have been in the series as well, but ultimately Miami came out on top and solidified their place among the great teams of basketball lore. If you're looking for a GOAT team candidate with young, athletic star power, positionless basketball, an array of shooters, a defensive-minded team, and one of the greatest players of all time at the very height of his powers, then the 2013 Heat may be the team you're looking for, as they have a somewhat underrated case for the title of greatest team in NBA history. The 95-96 Chicago Bulls, recognized by many, maybe most, as the greatest team in NBA history. But once you break it all down, just how strong is their case? As many of you already know, the Bulls were coming off of a disappointing second-round elimination to the Orlando Magic. As a result, motivation was certainly not a trait the 96 Bulls were lacking. The major adjustment heading into the season after the elimination was the addition of the Worm, Dennis Rodman. The Bulls acquiring Dennis definitely wasn't universally seen as a wise move, as Rodman already seemed as if he was at the end of his rope after a dramatic stint with the Spurs, and some analysts felt like Dennis could be the piece that destroys the Bulls organization from the inside. But if there was ever a man fit to handle this challenge, it was the psychological genius, Phil Jackson. Jackson has been praised over the years for his brilliance in terms of basketball X's and O's. But what makes him stand out in my mind is how he controls and influences players' emotions, the way he can manage egos and build a culture, even amidst a tumultuous storm of conflict and tension throughout the entire organization. So let's get into the roster he would be leading. Starting at the point guard position was the 6'6" Ron Harper. The 32-year-old guard used to be a star in his own right, as he averaged over 20 points per game in his days with the Clippers before joining the Bulls. When people reflect on the Bulls' great defense, of course, they often bring up Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman, but they often overlook Harper, who was a solid on-ball defender, was a large defender by point guard standards, and was often among the league leaders in steals per game. He put up modest numbers in his 23 minutes per game, but his defensive impact and his veteran presence went well beyond the stat sheet. Starting at the 2 was none other than the guy that most people recognize as the greatest player to ever live, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. He was 32 years old and at the height of his powers in terms of basketball IQ. He fiercely led his team while putting up numbers of 30.4 points, 6.6 rebounds, 4.3 assists, and 2.2 steals on 49.5% shooting. He also shot a lethal 42.7% from three-point range this season. The three-point line was a slightly shorter distance at this time, but even with that being said, Jordan's three-point efficiency was good enough to rake him in the top 10 of the entire league. This overall performance resulted in Jordan being named the league's MVP for a 4th time, and he was also a monster defensively, making first-team all-defense. Starting at small forward was the tenacious 6'7" Scottie Pippen, who may have had his greatest season on the defensive end, as he not only made first-team all-defense, but also finished second overall in the Defensive Player of the Year voting, only behind Gary Payton. Along with that, he put up his typical solid co-star production of 19.4 points, 6.4 rebounds, 5.9 assists, and 1.7 steals on 46.3% shooting. At the 4 spot was of course Dennis Rodman, whose role certainly wasn't to score on the offensive end, but simply to defend and rebound. And in those combined aspects, there's arguably nobody better, as Dennis led the league in rebounds with 14.9 per game, nearly 3 rebounds higher than the closest competitor. He was also first-team all-defense as Rodman filled the void the Bulls had the previous season in terms of interior defense. That impact can't be understated, as Rodman was even assigned to guard the Magic's Shaquille O'Neal at times, a role he relatively did very well in. More on that later. Starting at center was the 7'2" Luke Longley, who had modest numbers in his 26 minutes per game and was certainly the weakest spot in their starting lineup. But he still fit in well within the triangle offense and provided much-needed size in the interior. The first men to come off the bench were a pair of elite shooters in Tony Kukoc and Steve Kerr. Kukoc was very ahead of his time, as the 6'10" small forward had a solid handle of the basketball and was capable of playing like a guard despite his 6'10" frame. He put up quality contributions in his 26 minutes per game, and he also shot a solid 40.3% from three-point range. The skilled forward was rewarded for this performance with the league's 6th Man of the Year award. Steve Kerr was far from a statistical monster off the bench, but what he was asked to do, he did extremely well, as he was the pinnacle of efficient shooting, as he was 51.5% from three-point range and 92.9% from the free throw line. In terms of being a spot-up shooting role player, it really doesn't get much more efficient than that. Rounding out the rest of the roster were guys like Judd Bushler, Bill Wennington, Dickie Simpkins, and Randy Brown. With the Zen Master working as the puppeteer, the greatest player on a revenge mission, and with a deep roster and a system built to succeed, the Bulls were set to dominate the league on a level no one had seen before. You could see their intensity and purpose from the early goings, as they started the season with 41 wins and only 3 losses, which was the greatest 3-loss start of all time. They were absolutely suffocating on defense, bolstering the league's best defense to go along with their best offense. The Bulls starters of Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman made up 3 of the NBA's 5 first-team All-Defenders. Since the NBA has had at least 25 teams, the '96 Bulls are the only team to ever accomplish that. When you consider that fact and then throw in Harper on top of it, the Bulls likely had the greatest perimeter defense the league has ever seen. With the Bulls' talented pieces, they could play just about any style of basketball, as they were great in the fast break, they could slow it down and run things through the post while Pippen facilitates as the point forward, they could play a shooting small ball lineup with Kukoc acting as the center, and with their toughness and collective tenacity, they could play as physically as the game permitted. By the end of the regular season, they finished with a record-setting 72 wins, heading into the playoffs as possibly the strongest favorites to win the championship the league has ever seen. They started by sweeping the Miami Heat in 3 games, and then comfortably eliminated the New York Knicks in 5 games, which set them up for a rematch with the team that defeated them the year before, the Orlando Magic. This was a 60-win defending conference champion Magic team, led by their dynamic tandem of Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway. This is not the kind of team that's supposed to get swept out of the Eastern Conference Finals, but that's exactly what Jordan and the Bulls did, charging their way to the NBA Finals. Waiting in the championship series was the 64-win Seattle Supersonics, led by Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp. They were a strong, defensive-minded team that most years they would be considered as the favorites to win the championship, but not against these Bulls, who started off with a commanding 3-0 lead before eventually eliminating the Sonics in 6 games, securing their 4th championship, with Michael Jordan being named the Finals MVP. Looking at the results of this group over the 1996 season, we see that the Bulls finished with a record-setting 72-10 record. They statistically had the best defense and the best offense overall that season. Of the teams in the GOAT series so far, they're the only team that finished as the best in both offense and defense. They beat teams by an incredible average of 12.2 points per game, which is the 4th greatest margin of victory in NBA history, and only slightly behind the 72 Lakers of the GOAT teams so far. They cruised through the playoffs with a 15-3 record, and they had that season's MVP, who was Michael Jordan. In this series, the word greatest gets thrown around quite a bit, but with this team in particularly, you can't possibly overuse it. They had possibly the greatest player of all time, the greatest duo of all time, the greatest coach of all time, the greatest perimeter defense of all time, the greatest rebounder of all time, altogether making a pretty solid argument for the title of greatest NBA team of all time. The 1986-87 Los Angeles Lakers, who many people consider as the strongest championship group of the Showtime Lakers era. The Lakers organization has an incredibly strong and rich history, with many greats represented by some of the greatest players of all time.
Even with all those great teams considered, many people still recognize this 87 group as the greatest Laker team, or even the greatest basketball team of NBA history. No team greater represents the Lakers' brand, culture, and identity than the Showtime Lakers, whose fast-paced and exciting style of play helped define an entire era of NBA basketball. Leading this group at the point guard position was none other than the incredibly dynamic Earvin "Magic" Johnson. The 6'9" point guard had the first of his 3 MVP seasons, as he was the engine that drove the Lakers' high-octane offense. With his sudden and pinpoint decision-making, all of his teammates had to be ready at all times for the easier scoring opportunities that Magic would provide for them. It was another remarkably productive year for Magic, as he averaged about 24 points, a league-leading 12.2 assists, 6.3 rebounds, and over 1.5 steals on 52.2% shooting. Simply put, it was one of the greatest dual-threat seasons the league has ever seen, as Magic wasn't just the NBA's leader in assists per game, but he was also top 10 in points per game, which is easily the highest anyone has ever ranked in scoring, while averaging at least 12 assists per game. His support in the backcourt was the underrated 6'3" shooting guard Byron Scott. Scott loved to be on the finishing end of Magic's fast break, and had a solid mid-range pull-up jumper. He didn't shoot a tremendous amount of threes, but when he did, he was one of the most efficient shooters in the entire league, as he hit 43.6% from that distance, which was the 4th best percentage in the entire league. His offensive impact should get more credit for his team's success, as he put up 17 points per game during the 86-87 regular season. Starting at small forward was the 6'9" star, big game James Worthy. James is one of the most overlooked greats of basketball history and was the perfect running mate for Magic Johnson. James loved to run the floor and score in transition, and was the most frequent beneficiary of Magic's no-look passes. That wasn't the only way he scored his points though. James was great with his back to the basket and in face-up situations with the opponent, as he had one of the quickest first steps the game has ever seen. His unique ability to find his way to the paint led him to have an elite field goal efficiency, especially at his position, as he shot 53.9% on the season. He was selected to be an All-Star for the 2nd straight season, and on the year, he averaged nearly 20 points and 6 rebounds. Starting at power forward was the young AC Green, who always played with hustle and heart, and who was a couple rebounds short of a double-double average in only 28 minutes per game. AC certainly wasn't one of the major stars on the Lakers roster, but his contribution shouldn't be downplayed, as he was solid defensively in the interior, and he was very reliable at securing the boards. He's also the most dependable player of all time when it comes to availability, as AC is easily the all-time record holder for consecutive games played, and only missed 3 games throughout the entirety of his career. Then of course, starting at center was the captain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. At 39 years old, Kareem certainly wasn't anywhere near his prime anymore, but his age didn't stop him from being one of the better centers of the NBA, as he poured in his 17.5 points per game and 6.7 rebounds on his typical incredibly efficient field goal percentage. Despite his age, Kareem was still very capable of finishing in the fast break, but the majority of his production came in half-court sets with his iconic skyhook shot, which, coming from the 7'2" Kareem, is probably the most indefensible shot the game has ever seen. Accompanied with their all-time great starting 5 was a powerful bench, especially concerning the first 3 players of the second unit. First off is Michael Cooper. Cooper is probably the greatest perimeter defender that no one talks about. He was incredibly tenacious with his on-ball defense, and was usually the player who was assigned to contain the opponent's best perimeter score. For his career, Cooper made an astonishing 8 all-defense teams, and his 1987 campaign was even better, as he was that season's Defensive Player of the Year. He was one of the original 3-and-D type of players, as he shot 38.5% from three-point range on 2.8 three-point attempts per game, which, believe it or not, was actually a lot of attempts in the 80s, and he attempted the second most three-point shots that season among all NBA players. Midway through the season, the Lakers acquired Michael Thompson in a trade. He was a 6'10" center/power forward who was a finesse type of player. He was a solid scoring threat in his days before Los Angeles, averaging as many as 20 points per game. But with this all-time great Lakers squad, he would simply need to be a spark off the bench, and that's exactly what the 32-year-old did, as he chipped in with over 11 points and 5 rebounds on only 23 minutes per game. Also in the heart of the rotation was the 6'8" Kurt Rambis, who didn't have a pretty style of play, but he was another one of those players who did the little things well. He would fight for loose balls, help defend the Celtics bigs, and was always a sure thing to give 100% effort. This powerful roster of incredible individual players was a team that seemed tailor-made for Magic Johnson's skill set, as every member of the roster, including Kareem, was excellent at running the floor and pushing the tempo. I know I've alluded to this several times so far in this video, but I can't emphasize enough how uniquely fast this group was, as they treated every gained possession like it was the start of a track meet. Sometimes it almost seemed like they were completely forcing a fast break tempo, but even then, they still found ways to make it work. If they had to slow things down, they could, as Magic sometimes orchestrated the offense like a quarterback from the top of the key, and there's not many players who are better scoring options in the post than Kareem and James Worthy. Under Pat Riley's strong leadership and insatiable desire to win, this Lakers team had the league's best 65-17 record throughout the regular season. In the playoffs, no one was a challenge for them throughout the Western Conference, as they swept the Denver Nuggets in 3 games, defeated the Golden State Warriors in 5 games, and then swept the Seattle Supersonics out of the Western Conference Finals. Waiting for them in the NBA Finals was their rival and true challengers, the Boston Celtics. This was simply Los Angeles' time though, as they controlled the pace of the series and imposed their will upon Boston, defeating them in 6 games. To go along with Magic's iconic game-winning baby skyhook in Game 4, he also put up an incredibly monstrous stat line, nearly achieving the first triple-double average in NBA Finals history. It was a series performance that was so impressive that by the end of it, even Larry Bird was conceding that Magic Johnson had become the best player in the NBA. Looking at the results of this group over the 1987 season, we see that the Lakers finished with a league-best 65-17 record. They statistically had the league's best offense and the 7th best defense overall that season. They beat teams by a strong average of 9.3 points over the course of the season, and they coasted through the playoffs with a 15-3 record, represented by that season's MVP and Finals MVP, Magic Johnson. There's many GOAT-worthy teams of NBA history, but in a 7-game playoff series, this team may very well be the best of the best. As far as how they would match up against the other all-time great teams, well, I think the key would be for them to control the game's tempo, and if they were able to do that, then there's a decent chance that no one would beat them in a 7-game series, as a high-scoring and free-flowing style plays too much into the hands of this team. The key would be to get them to play in a physical half-court game, which is something the 96 Bulls or 89 Pistons may have been able to do successfully in a hypothetical matchup. The 2013-14 San Antonio Spurs, the 5th and final championship team of the San Antonio dynasty. This team is famously remembered for their unselfish style of basketball, and for quite simply, some of the most beautiful team basketball we've ever seen. Veteran leadership certainly wasn't something the San Antonio group was lacking, as they had one of the oldest teams in the league, which was jam-packed with championship experience. Leading this squad was one of the greatest basketball coaches of all time, Greg Popovich, who instilled his fighting spirit into this squad. Under the leadership of Popovich, the Spurs played some of the most intelligent basketball I've ever seen. And one of the examples is how they used their spacing and ball movement to completely master the corner 3-point shot, which naturally is the most efficient shot in all of basketball. That season, San Antonio was easily the best 3-point shooting team in the league, as they hit a remarkable 39.7% from that distance. Along with that, the Spurs also led all teams that season in assists per game, with an average of 25.2. Running the floor for this group at the point guard position was the 31-year-old former Finals MVP Tony Parker. Tony operated as the floor general with his sound decision-making and his high basketball IQ. Not only did he put up solid numbers throughout the season, but among starting point guards league-wide, Tony had one of the lowest turnovers per game averages in the entire league. Parker is also an underappreciated defensive guard, as he actually finished with some Defensive Player of the Year votes this season. Joining him in the starting backcourt was the 6'6" shooting guard Danny Green. At this point in history, Green was one of the best 3-and-D options in the entire league, as he had just recently broke 3-point records in the NBA Finals, and he was an underrated defensive player. Green was fantastic at making the game easier for his teammates, as he was terrific at moving without the basketball, and when his teammates found him open, he was about as sure of a thing as it gets, as he converted 41.5% of his 3-point attempts that season. Starting at the small forward spot was the young and upcoming star Kawhi Leonard. Although Kawhi hadn't quite reached his superstar levels of production, he was still everything the team needed him to be, as he was an absolute pest of a lockdown defender while efficiently chipping in from the field and from three-point range. With the game of basketball being dominated by athletic wing players, a young Kawhi Leonard was the perfect counter for San Antonio, as they used him as their defensive stopper for the Kevin Durant's and LeBron Jameses of the world. By far, their weakest link in the starting unit was the big man Tiago Splitter. With that being said, the 6'11 Splitter still knew how to operate in this team-first engine, as he was actually quite solid as a passer and sufficed decently as a rebounder. It is worth mentioning that although Splitter was a frequent starter, he also only averaged 21 minutes per game, mostly due to San Antonio's solid rotations with their 6th, 7th, and 8th man. More on those guys in a bit. Starting at the center position was the all-time great Tim Duncan. Although he was no longer in his prime, the big fundamental was still very effective at this point in his career, as he was second on the team in scoring while leading the Spurs in both rebounds and blocks. Duncan served as San Antonio's lead-by-example player, as his defensive presence around the rim was constantly felt, even at this later stage in his career. Obviously, you can't talk about the Spurs dynasty without bringing up one of the greatest sixth men in the history of the game, Manu Ginobili. Ginobili was a stabilizing force for the Spurs' second unit, as he was always quick to provide an offensive spark off the bench. He was a multifaceted talent who could finish around the rim, he was a solid three-point option, and he was one of the more underrated passers during that era. Marco Bellinelli and Patty Mills were not far behind Manu off the bench, and despite being role players with limited minutes, these two guys were some of the best shooters on the team, as they were both hitting north of 40% from three-point range. This well-rounded and experienced team finished the regular season with a 62-20 record. The Spurs started off the playoffs by being surprised by an overachieving Mavericks team, who pushed the first round to 7 games, but after that, San Antonio was locked in, both offensively and defensively. In the second round, they comfortably eliminated a talented Trailblazers team in only 5 games. And in the Western Conference Finals against the 59-win Oklahoma City Thunder, they eliminated Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and the rest of that strong team in just 6 games. The NBA Finals were a rematch with a team that beat them the previous season, the Big Three Miami Heat. The thing is, San Antonio had matured and had significantly improved their chemistry. In the finals, the Spurs dominated the Heat like they were up against a D-League team, as they had an average margin of victory of a whopping 14 points per game, which is one of the largest averages in NBA Finals history. At times, the ball movement the Spurs displayed looked like the Harlem Globetrotters toying with the Washington Generals, as they went on to win the series easily in 5 games, and Kawhi Leonard was rewarded the Finals MVP. Looking at the results of this group over the 2014 season, we see that the Spurs finished with a 62-20 record, which was the best record in the NBA. They statistically had the 7th best offense and the 3rd best defense throughout the regular season. They had the best margin of victory that season, as they beat teams by an average of 7.7 points per game on the year. They cruised to an NBA championship, finishing that playoff season with a 16-7 record, although they did not have that season's league MVP, who was Kevin Durant. A lot of different teams have put forth a strong case for the title of the greatest team of all time, but probably none of them did it as unselfishly as the Spurs did in 2014, as they demonstrated beautifully what peak team-first basketball looks like. Given their defensive identity, their well-rounded offensive attack, and their emphasis on effective three-point shooting, I don't see this team struggling to compete with any all-time great team in a 7-game series, regardless of era. The Malice at the Palace is recognized as one of the worst nights of NBA history. For those who don't know, the Malice at the Palace was an event that took place on November 19, 2004, in a rivalry game between the defending champion Detroit Pistons and the talented Indiana Pacers. In summary of what took place, the game was physical throughout, and you could sense the tension between the two rivals. It reached a boiling point with only moments left in the fourth quarter. the Indiana Pacers' Ron Artest strongly fouled Ben Wallace. Wallace retaliated, and the teams began to surround the players as the commotion was just starting to die down. This was barely the start of the mayhem though. Ron Artest then decided to rest on the scorer's table while the refs were getting all the other players under control. After several moments of Artest just chilling there, he's then struck with a beer that was thrown by a fan, and without hesitation, Artest runs into the stands and starts attacking the fan that he thinks threw the drink. Stephen Jackson backs him up and is seen throwing violent punches at other fans. It's complete and utter chaos at this point. Chairs are being thrown, Jermaine O'Neal punches a confrontational fan on the court, Ron Artest is nearly pepper sprayed by the police, and the players are showered with food and drinks as they head into the locker room as the game was abruptly ended even with time left in regulation. Ron Artest was suspended for a total of 74 games, which was the entirety of that remaining season. Stephen Jackson was suspended for 30 games, and Jermaine O'Neal was suspended for 25 games. Needless to say, this whole ordeal was a huge black eye for the reputation of the NBA, and the event became a catalyst for the softening of the game of basketball as the years have gone on. With that being said, a lot of those aspects have been pretty well documented on YouTube and even on this channel. But one aspect that is rarely discussed is how this event ruined what could have been the only NBA championship in Indiana Pacers history. That might be hard for some of you to envision, but unless you were a die-hard Pacers fan during that era, you probably didn't realize just how strong their championship chances were. The season before the Malice at the Palace, Indiana had one of their best seasons in franchise history, as they were a top 3 team defensively and had the best record in the entire league with a 61-21 record. Heading into the playoffs, many people considered them as the favorites in the Eastern Conference. But unfortunately, they were stopped short by one of the greatest defenses of all time, the 2004 Detroit Pistons, who eliminated them from the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games. They were extremely close to winning the championship in the 2003-2004 season, and in that following offseason, they got even better by adding the fantastic wing scorer in Stephen Jackson. Along with that, Ron Artest had taken a huge leap forward, as he was clearly on his way to a career year, as he was just entering his athletic prime. He was dominating on both sides of the court, as he was averaging nearly 25 points per game while looking to repeat his title as the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year. At the time of the Malice at the Palace, the Pacers had started the season with a 7-2 record, and in both of those losses, many of their best players didn't participate due to injuries. With a loaded roster that was performing well, with headliners like a prime Ron Artest, Stephen Jackson, Reggie Miller, and Jermaine O'Neal, they appeared as if they were the best team in the entire league, and the players thought so too.
You know, at that point, the whole league knew we were the best team in the league that year. We had the best record, and this game was our test to see where we were. You know, they were one of the best teams at the time. So we went there and blew them out. We were winning by 15 with like 45 seconds left.
They had defeated us the year before in the playoffs to move on to the finals and win. Ron and Jermaine were kind of having a butt of heads of whose team it was. And I was like, you guys, it's neither of your team, it's my team. Don't you guys understand, if we win this series, we're going to be NBA champs? Because I knew whoever we faced in the West, which turned out to be the Lakers, defense was going to win that championship. And the 2 best defensive teams at the time were Detroit and Indiana. I was like, if we win this series, we're going to be champs. But they couldn't understand that. And they go on to win the championship. And then, you know, obviously we're conference rivals, we're division rivals, and they just got into it. And that was nothing. That happens all the time. That was broken up. It's the cup that came in later.
But unfortunately, that's when the Malice at the Palace happened. As Stephen Jackson said, that game with Detroit was seen as a measuring stick for the Pacers. It was against the team that had just eliminated them from last season's playoffs. Not only did the Pacers outplay the Pistons in a rivalry game, but they were absolutely destroying them in their own building before the brawl broke out. Now consider this. Despite the fact that Ron Artest was suspended for the entire season, and Jermaine O'Neal and Stephen Jackson were suspended for 55 games combined, Indiana still made the playoffs and pushed the Eastern Conference champion Detroit Pistons to 6 games once again. If that's what they could accomplish in a rocky season of suspensions and drama, and without their best player, then it's hard for me to argue against a fully loaded 2005 Pacers team winning the championship. Sure, they would have had to have beat San Antonio in the 2005 NBA Finals, but I do think that's something that they would have done. Not only do they match up really well, but they had a pretty good history against the Spurs. In the 04 and the 05 season, the Pacers had a 2-2 record against San Antonio, and 2 of those games took place after the Pacers had received all of their suspensions. The saddest part about this whole thing is the fact that this was Reggie Miller's farewell season at the age of 39, and he was still a very productive player at that point, so it would have been a beautiful way for him to end his career with his only championship ring to wrap up his 18 seasons that he played exclusively for the Indiana Pacers. After so many years of being under the foot of Jordan and the Bulls and Shaq and Kobe's Lakers, it almost seems like this was his ultimate destiny. But unfortunately, sometimes life doesn't have fairy tale endings. So on my channel, I'm closing in on 200,000 subscribers, which means that I'm getting my video ready to answer 200 questions from my subscribers. One of the questions that I received over and over again is which team was the greatest basketball team of all time if every player on the roster was in their prime. Seeing that this was a really fun question and that I really needed time to flesh out my thoughts, I figured I'd give this one its own individual video. So these are the top 16 teams in NBA history, in my opinion, if all the players involved were in their prime. The reason I picked 16 is pretty simple, because at some point I might like to run a playoff simulation in NBA 2K. Let me know and me and my editor will get it ready. Starting off with number 16, the 06 to 07 Miami Heat. The hypothetical starting lineup would be Gary Payton, who was a Defensive Player of the Year winner and a 20 points per game scorer in his prime. You have Dwayne Wade, who was a great defensive player as well and a 30 points per game scorer. You had Eddie Jones, who was a perennial all-star, Antoine Walker, who was a great three-point shooter and a scorer in his own right, and you have a prime Shaquille O'Neal, who was the most dominant player in modern NBA history. Some of the noteworthy players who would be coming off the bench would be Alonzo Mourning, who was an elite two-way player in his own right, and Jason Williams, who was a solid playmaker and a highlight machine. Number 15, the 2021 to 2022 Los Angeles Lakers. It's hard to say whether or not these guys would have on-court chemistry if they all were in their primes, but without question, they would be incredibly talented. You have Russell Westbrook in his triple-double 30 points per game form. You have Carmelo Anthony, probably from his days as a Denver Nugget. You have LeBron James, who is going to be in his impressive 2013 Miami form. Then there's Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard, which will make them one of the greatest interior defenses of all time. That's just the starting unit. Coming off the bench would be a prime Rajon Rondo, Isaiah Thomas, DeAndre Jordan, and Trevor Ariza. Number 14, the 98 to 99 Los Angeles Lakers. The starting lineup would be Derek Fisher, Kobe Bryant, Glenn Rice, Dennis Rodman, and Shaquille O'Neal. Some of the more noteworthy players to come off the bench would be one of the most clutch shooters of all time, Robert Horry, Eddie Jones, and Eldon Campbell. Number 13, the 1979 to 1980 Boston Celtics. The starting lineup would be Nate Tiny Archibald, Pistol Pete Maravich, Cedric Cornbread Maxwell, Larry Bird, and Dave Cowens. 4 of these guys were either MVP winners or MVP finalists. The only guy who wasn't was Cedric Maxwell, but he was also a Finals MVP winner. One of the more noteworthy players to come off the bench would be ML Carr. Number 12, the 2012 to 2013 Los Angeles Lakers. At that point in time, Steve Nash was nowhere close to his prime, as he was approaching the age of 40 and was having plenty of back problems. But this time, he'd be the floor general in his peak form. Alongside of him would be a peak Kobe Bryant, Ron Artest in his Defensive Player of the Year form in Indiana, and Dwight Howard, who would be just as good as he was in Orlando well before the back surgery. One of the more noteworthy players to come off the bench would be Anton Jamison, who was one of the best scorers in the league during the early 2000s. Number 11, the 1985-1986 Boston Celtics. The starting lineup would be Danny Ainge, Dennis Johnson, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and instead of Robert Parrish, it would be a prime Bill Walton. It's also worth considering that Dennis Johnson gets a significant boost as he would be in his finals MVP form from his Seattle Supersonics days. Robert Parrish is obviously the one coming off the bench, as he was a great defensive player and a 20 points per game scorer. Number 10, the 17-18 Cleveland Cavaliers. Starting at point guard would be Derrick Rose, who would be in his young MVP form. Then you have Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, and Kevin Love. And people forget that Love was one of the league's top scorers and the game's top rebounder while he was in Minnesota. Tristan Thompson finishes out the starting five. Some of the noteworthy players to come off the bench would be Kyle Korver and J.R. Smith. Number 9, the 1971-1972 Los Angeles Lakers. This is the team that famously won an NBA record 33 straight regular season games, and won 69 games in total before they went on to win the NBA championship. With that being said, most of the players involved were not in their prime. Jerry West was as good as ever, and so was Gil Goodrich. But at the 3 spot, this was the final season of Elgin Baylor's career, and he didn't even make it through the first half of the regular season. Then you have Happy Hairston, and now a prime Wilt Chamberlain, who was in his 1962 50 points and 25 rebounds per game form. One of the noteworthy players to come off the bench was Jim McMillan. Number 8, the 2012-2013 Miami Heat. The starting five would be Mario Chalmers, Dwayne Wade, Ray Allen, LeBron James, and Chris Bosh. You gotta remember, this team won 27 straight regular season games, but guys like Bosh and Wade had already taken a significant step back. The only guy that was actually in his prime was LeBron James. But now, you're getting a Ray Allen who was capable of averaging 25 points per game, and who was even an above-the-rim player. Without question, Ray Allen being in his peak form is the greatest upgrade for this squad. Some of the noteworthy players to come off the bench would be a peak Rashard Lewis, who was a great scorer and an all-time great three-point shooter, Shane Battier, who was a fantastic defensive player, and Mike Miller, who was a solid three-point shooter. Number 7, the 2012-2013 San Antonio Spurs. You would have Tony Parker in his finals MVP form, and then you would have a peak Tracy McGrady, who would be just as good as he was in Orlando in the early 2000s. Then you have Kawhi Leonard, who would be in his 2019 Toronto Raptors form, Boris Diaw at the power forward, and Tim Duncan at the 5. Some of the more noteworthy players to come off the bench would be Manu Ginobili, Danny Green, and a 20 points per game scorer in Steven Jackson. Number 6, the 1985-1986 Philadelphia 76ers. One of the best playmakers and pickpockets of the era was Maurice Cheeks, and alongside of him would be a fantastic scorer in Andrew Toney. At small forward would be Julius Erving. The power forward would be an MVP form Charles Barkley, and the starting center is one of the most underrated players of all time, the 30 points and 15 rebounds per game Moses Malone. Coming off the bench would be one of the greatest scorers in NBA history, who averaged as high as 34 points per game in the 1970s, and his name is Bob McAdoo, who was also an MVP winner. Another bench player would be the Secretary of Defense Bobby Jones, who was simply one of the greatest defensive players of all time. Number 5, the 1984-1985 Los Angeles Lakers. Now picture the Showtime Lakers in all of their glory, but instead of just Kareem Abdul-Jabbar being in his usual Showtime form, he is even better, as he is as good as he was on the Milwaukee Bucks in the early 1970s. The starting five would be Magic Johnson, Byron Scott, James Worthy, Bob McAdoo in his 34 points per game form, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Coming off the bench would be an NBA Hall of Famer Jamal Wilkes, and one of the greatest role players and 3-and-D players of all time, Michael Cooper. Number 4. The 2010 to 2011 Boston Celtics. Obviously, they would have all the great attributes that they had of the team that won the championship in 2008. But Paul Pierce is better because now he's in his early 2000s prime form. Kevin Garnett is in his Minnesota Timberwolves 2004 MVP form. Ray Allen is much better as he's in his 25 points per game form. And even Rajon Rondo is now in his 2012 form instead of 2008. This team instantly becomes so much better. And oh yeah, starting at the center is now the most dominant player in modern history, Shaquille O'Neal. Coming off the bench would be one of the guys who was one of the best bigs in the Eastern Conference for a short period of time, and that's Jermaine O'Neal. Number 3. The 2003 to 2004 Los Angeles Lakers. This is a team that went all the way to the NBA Finals in 2004, but consider the fact that none of these guys were in their prime. Gary Payton was in the twilight of his career, and was nowhere close to his 1996 form where he was the Defensive Player of the Year. Kobe Bryant wasn't himself as he was dealing with the Colorado trials. Then there's Rick Fox as small forward. Starting at power forward would be Karl Malone, but this time in his peak form from the 1990s, and Shaquille O'Neal, who would be in his peak shape from the 99 to 2000 season. Some of the noteworthy players to come off the bench would be Derek Fisher and a prime Horace Grant, who would be just as good as he was in the early 90s with the Chicago Bulls. Number 2. The 2018 to 2019 Golden State Warriors. The starting lineup would be Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, and DeMarcus Cousins. Essentially, you have the 2017 Golden State Warriors. But instead of Zaza Pachulia in the 5 spot, you have a prime DeMarcus Cousins, who was a great scorer, a solid rebounder, and one of the best passing bigs at his peak. A couple noteworthy players to come off the bench would be Andre Iguodala, and this was a much better Iggy, as he would be in his extremely athletic Philadelphia 76ers form. And the other noteworthy bench player is a prime Andrew Bogut. Number 1. The 96 to 97 Chicago Bulls. Now picture all of the glory of the 95 to 96 Bulls, who won an NBA record at the time 72 games, on their way to the NBA championship. To this day, that's the most regular season games won by a team that won the championship. But what's crazy is that none of those players were in their prime. Think about it. Even Michael Jordan was much better in his first three-peat, both athletically and statistically. Scottie Pippen had his career year 2 years prior. Dennis Rodman was much younger, much more athletic, and had better rebounding numbers in the early 90s. And even Ron Harper, who would be the starting point guard, wasn't in the same form that he once was with the Clippers and the Cleveland Cavaliers, where he was an athletic player who was a 20 points per game scorer. But instead of Luke Longley, starting at the 5 would be Robert Parrish, an all-time great big, a solid defensive player, and a 20 points per game scorer. Then coming off the bench, you'd have Tony Kukoc and Steve Kerr. This team would have everything. They'd have the scoring, they'd have the defense, both on the interior and on the perimeter. They had rebounding, they had chemistry, and not only did they have the greatest player of all time, but likely the greatest coach of all time as well. And that's why this incredibly upgraded version of the 90s Bulls is my choice as the greatest team of all time in this ridiculously hypothetical scenario. So recently, a specific viewer has been asking me for a very specific video, and on several of my videos, he's actually been one of the most liked comments, which tells me that a decent amount of you actually want this as well. So today, I'm putting together what I believe is the ultimate basketball team, not just based on their talent and greatness, but also from the perspective of how well these players would blend together. This is how it works. There's 15 roster spots and I need to pick 3 players for each position. There will be the starters, a second unit, and a third unit, and I'll do my best to explain how these units work together. Also, for those of you who want to take the time, let me know in the comments how you would build your ultimate roster. So without further ado, let's get into it. First off, let's determine who the starters will be. I want a team that works together seamlessly, which means I want ball movement, and I want the best point guard for feeding every superstar teammate that he has. For this reason, I'm taking Magic Johnson as my starting point guard. He's got size, speed, and the crucial ability to make every one of his teammates better. As shooting guard, give me Michael Jordan. He's arguably the greatest scorer in NBA history, and he's probably the greatest defensive two guard as well. Not only will Jordan be a strong presence for post scoring, but with Magic as a backcourt teammate, there will be constant fast break opportunities, and Jordan is as good as anyone in the open court. Envision all the transition connections between James Worthy and Magic Johnson of the Showtime Lakers, but instead replace Worthy with a tongue-wagging Michael Jordan. With Magic and Jordan at the guards, it's extremely important that my small forward can spread the floor and hit three-point shots consistently, specifically in catch-and-shoot situations. For this purpose, I'm starting Larry Bird at small forward. This might sound crazy to some, but Bird was basically a player with no weakness whatsoever. He was 6'9", he could shoot from anywhere on the court with extreme efficiency, he was an all-time great passer, he was an underrated defensive player, and he was one of the greatest rebounders ever at his position. Some will argue that LeBron should be a starter, and although I respect that take, I think James fits better with the players in my second unit, while Bird's catch-and-shoot abilities are incredibly crucial to the chemistry of my starting group. I'm making an exception at the power forward position, and I'm moving Hakeem Olajuwon from his traditional 5th spot to the 4th spot. Hakeem is a player who is certainly a threat in the mid-range, and he has the speed and agility to keep up with perimeter players and stretch 4s. So I certainly think he has the ability to play the 4 extremely well, and thanks to his experience playing alongside of the 7'4" Ralph Sampson, I'm pretty confident Hakeem would have no issues starting alongside of another all-time great big man. Starting at center will be the 7'2" Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The captain had one of the most indefensible shots in NBA history, the skyhook, and we know he works in perfect harmony with my starting point guard, Magic Johnson. With Kareem and Hakeem in the starting unit, this team will bolster the most terrifying interior defense that basketball has ever seen. This interior lineup will also be a very familiar situation for Larry Bird, as he's almost always played with two big men down low, in Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish. But now, those two bigs will be on another level, with Kareem and Hakeem. As I mentioned, Bird spacing and shooting will be pivotal for this starting lineup, but Jordan could also be a massive help in that area, depending on which version of Jordan I take. In this case, I'll take 1990 Michael Jordan, who was hitting 37.6% of his three-point shots on a top 10 volume of three-point attempts. I'll take this starting 5 against any other starting 5 that you can come up with. So let's get into the second unit. At point guard, give me Steph Curry, as he's the ultimate floor spacer and the greatest three-point threat. At shooting guard, give me Kobe Bryant. Similar to Michael Jordan, he'll be a lethal two-way threat on the perimeter, and if it's needed, Kobe can operate in a slowed-down offensive attack and go to work from the post. Personally, I would like this version of Kobe to be the 06 version. It was before his knee surgery, so he still had the elite athleticism, but he had also developed his mid-range and perimeter game to be near unstoppable. At small forward is LeBron James. With Curry and Kobe operating as shoot-first guards, I like LeBron starting at the 3. But let's be honest, in this second unit, LeBron will be operating as the main floor general, despite the fact that Curry holds the title of point guard. LeBron will love to find a slashing Kobe Bryant and a spot-up shooting Steph Curry, giving these three players near flawless chemistry for the second unit. For LeBron, I definitely want the 2013 version. That way, his defensive abilities are at their peak, but he also functions as an elite three-point shooter. At power forward, I'll take Kevin Durant, which gives LeBron even more options of shooters on the perimeter. Just picture the 2017 Golden State Warriors, but instead of Draymond operating as the facilitator, it's a prime LeBron James. And instead of Klay Thompson at the 2, it's a prime Kobe Bryant. It just won't be fair at all. And then, at the center position for the second unit, I'll take a prime Shaquille O'Neal. Obviously, Shaq has that built-in chemistry and experience with Kobe, but Shaq also fits in perfectly with this scary second unit. When O'Neal was in his prime, the defense would frequently collapse upon him, as the defense desperately sent multiple defenders in a feeble attempt to slow him down. When the opposing team inevitably collapsed upon Shaq, he would kick it out to his open shooters, like Rick Fox and Derek Fisher. But now, he'll be kicking it out to shooters like Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. Talk about an upgrade. Honestly, this second unit is so good that you could argue that they should be the starters instead. But the thing is, the starters are usually the ones who close out the final minutes of the game. And I wouldn't want this second unit out there in the closing minutes, because Shaq's free throw shooting is a liability down the stretch. And if the opposing team wanted to execute a hack-a-Shaq strategy, that could certainly affect the dominating nature of this team. Therefore, I think it's wise to keep this second unit as the second unit. Now let's take a look at the third unit. With my starters and with the backups, I established the identity and the style of my team. So with this third group of players, I'd like to have players who could fill in for injuries and players who could operate as specialists for my specific team's needs. At point guard, give me Gary Payton. With Magic Johnson and with Steph Curry, I don't really have the best defensive presence from the point guard position, but that will not be an issue when the glove is on the court, as he's likely the greatest defensive point guard in NBA history. Not only was Payton also a very capable scorer, but he was also one of the all-time great lob passers. And on this roster, he'll have plenty of weapons to utilize for his alley-oop connections. At shooting guard for the third unit, give me Jerry West. He was also one of the greatest defensive players ever at his position, and West had scoring capabilities that were beyond his time, including solid range from the perimeter. At small forward, give me Scottie Pippen, a dynamic slasher and alley-oop partner for Gary Payton and Magic Johnson, and he'll be an available lockdown perimeter defender whenever the team needs him. At power forward, I'll take Tim Duncan. He's smart, unselfish, and fundamentally sound. Duncan is also a player who is very comfortable playing alongside of another all-time great big, and in this case, beside him will be the ultimate winner. Rounded out with Bill Russell at the center position, and what you have here is the most suffocating and defensively soul-crushing third unit ever. All of these players are capable passers at their positions, and if any starter is struggling with their assignment for any reason, these substitutes will address that issue immediately and adequately. Now I know, some of you have noticed the triggering omission, as I left Wilt Chamberlain off the roster, which seems especially insane coming from me, since I'm usually one of the biggest advocates for Wilt's legacy and greatness. But the thing is, this roster is already extremely loaded with all-time great bigs, and chemistry is imperative for this roster to be the best that it can be. Because of this, I'd rather have the bigs who spent the prime of their careers in a more team-oriented offense. So that concludes my 15-man roster. I'm not gonna lie, I would love to see my starters take on the second unit, and even my third unit could serve as a challenger as well. Obviously, I do not believe my roster is objectively the greatest possible team imaginable, but it's just that in my opinion. Who knows, maybe in a week from now, I'll have a different opinion and change up my roster. But for now, this is what makes the most sense to me. If you have a roster that you believe is better constructed and can beat my team, please do share it in the comment section below.
Y'all lost to the Pistons in 04. And by the way, them my big bros, I love them, I respect them. But like they scored 70 points a game, we would have mopped them.
You would have mopped them too?
They scored 70 points.
Let me see.
Would the 2017 Warriors beat the 2004 Pistons?
Y'all was barely winning.
We have an NBA record that will never be broken.
What's that?
When we kept, I think it was either 6 or 7 teams under 70 points in this scoring era.
Yeah, that never get broken.
That will never get broken again. We were defense. We hung our hat on defense. We would have beat the out of them. And I'm going to address that because Draymond said this bullshit.
Draymond killed you.
You crazy as
man, you can't guard Draymond Green.
He said this bullshit the other day on him and Shaq's podcast. We would have beat the out of them because for the simple fact they couldn't match up with us at any position.
Alright, so today's video is not something that's breaking news or even something that many people would think warrants a video. It's just a fun topic of debate and something that I think is worth talking about and something that I really wanted to give my 2 cents on. So Draymond Green and Rasheed Wallace, 2 guys who are known for getting lots of technical fouls, albeit being incredible players as well, have been having this beef about which team would win, the 2017 Golden State Warriors or the 2004 Detroit Pistons. Just a quick recap on these 2 teams. The 2017 Golden State Warriors famously signed Kevin Durant in the prior offseason and then stormed through the regular season and especially stormed through the playoffs as they went 16-1 in those playoffs. Now on the other hand, you have the 2004 Detroit Pistons, who was a very defensively minded team, to put it lightly. A more accurate assessment of them is probably that they were the greatest offensive team of all time, or at the very least, they were in that conversation as they were regularly holding teams under 70 points. And famously, they put the clamps on the 2004 Los Angeles Lakers, who had Shaq, Kobe, Karl Malone, and Gary Payton. People act like that team wasn't a championship Lakers team, but the reality is they were on their way until they ran into that wall that was Detroit. Now you saw Rasheed Wallace's original take at the beginning of this video. Draymond Green actually responded to that on Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it. And he tweeted this: "Sheed, we would have smacked y'all. Y'all was scoring 72 points per game. That's not winning a half." Just to interject real quick, that is major cap, and we'll get into that. "And we putting you on them big ass forces in every pick and roll. Let's see how you move your feet. That one ring was great though, big bro." We all appreciated it. So obviously some great shade thrown in response. So here's the thing. You're talking about 2 totally different teams from 2 totally different eras. I will say the most frustrating part of this entire debate between Rasheed Wallace and Draymond Green is not one time did anyone bring up pace. Rasheed Wallace did bring up the physicality of the 2004 playoffs in comparison to 2017, but let's be honest, nothing affects the score of the game more than the pace of play. You could talk about physicality, defense, 3-point shots in different eras. The reality is, if the game is at a snail's pace, it is going to dramatically affect the score of the game. And that was the case for the 2004 Pistons. Throughout the regular season, the 2017 Warriors actually averaged about 13 more possessions per game than the 2004 Pistons. But what's even crazier is that the Warriors actually picked up the pace in their playoff season, while things slowed down for the 2004 Pistons. Again, if the Warriors are getting 14 to 15 less opportunities to score on every single night, then of course scores are going to be dramatically affected. Regardless, Golden State is going to be nearly impossible to put the clamps on for just about any team. But these 04 Pistons were not just any other team. I actually think they matched up with Golden State quite well. Chauncey Billups was their starting point guard. He's going to be guarding Steph Curry, and Chauncey Billups was a 2-time All-Defender. It's not a bad matchup. Richard Hamilton has a high IQ and he's good at coming off screens. He'll be a good candidate to guard Klay Thompson. I'm not saying they're shutting these guys down, I'm just saying that they'll do a decent job. And then a small forward for Golden State, you have Kevin Durant. And again, there's nobody that can stop Kevin Durant regularly. But I will say, when you're looking at the vast history of NBA defensive players, and especially wing defenders, one of the guys who stands out as a good candidate to contain Durant is actually Tayshaun Prince. He's 6 foot 9 inches tall with an incredibly long wingspan, and he was one of the best defensive players of his era. Very few players can match Durant with his length, and Tayshaun is one of the guys who actually can. Then you have Rasheed and Draymond guarding each other on the court, and I think we all can admit that would be highly entertaining, especially when you bring their antics and attitude into the equation. And then at center, you're going to have Zaza Pachulia and Ben Wallace. And especially when it comes to the boards and the defensive play, Ben Wallace is going to be eating him for lunch. Again, Warriors are threats all over the court. They have incredible scorers, they have incredible shooters. You're not just going to clamp these guys across the board. So trust me, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying Detroit's one of the teams that actually might be well suited to defend them, especially when you consider how they're arguably the greatest defensive team of all time. Draymond's tweet said they were scoring 72 points per game, and that's not true. Sure, there were some games where they scored 72 points, but they were actually averaging 87 in the playoffs. And again, that's still not much by today's modern standards. But when you look at less three-point shots and about 15 less possessions per game, it starts to make sense. Now, the one thing about the Pistons is they don't really have that advantage on the offensive end. That's why the 2001 Lakers always seem like the ideal matchup for the 2017 Warriors, because we all know Zaza Pachulia wouldn't stand a chance against a prime Shaq. Shaq's easily getting 40 points and 20 rebounds on every night. Because Ben Wallace is such a limited offensive player, they don't really have that advantage. So I think the most difficult part for Detroit is not slowing down the Warriors' offense, but it's just keeping up with their offense with their own. Now I gotta say, these guys are both very biased to the teams they played for, and that's rather obvious, you expect that. But neither guy is giving the other team enough respect. I always think it's funny when old heads act like they would mop these great modern teams when they didn't even mop the entire competition they were up against that year. The 04 Pistons are a great example of that. For goodness sake, they went to 7 games in the Eastern Conference semifinals that year against the New Jersey Nets. And again, as much as I love Jason Kidd, Kenyon Martin, and Richard Jefferson, they're not the 2017 Golden State Warriors. That series was up for grabs all the way up to the final game. And now you're trying to tell me that you're going to handle the Warriors in say 4 or 5 games? That's insane. It's the same thing whenever Kevin Garnett or any of the 08 Celtics go on about how they would just sweep through other all-time great teams. Like in your own playoff series in 2008, you went to 7 games with the Joe Johnson-led Atlanta Hawks, and then to 7 games with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who just had LeBron and a bunch of guys who weren't nearly on his level. So again, in order to earn that level of respect, in order to get into this conversation where you could just say, oh, our team would just sweep that other team, we'd whop them in 4 or 5 games, you gotta at least have handled your own competition in that era to that extent. Otherwise, you just look ridiculous. And in this case, Rasheed Wallace does look that ridiculous. Ultimately, in a hypothetical series like this, I think the Warriors win in about 6 games. I'm just saying that I think Detroit could do a better job containing them than they're given credit for, especially when you understand the context of the pace of play and how the game was played. The problem, and where Golden State is really going to take advantage, is the Pistons don't have any major offensive advantages. If they were stronger at the center position, then yeah, they could take advantage of Zaza. That's where other great teams like the 94 Rockets, the 2001 Lakers, the 1983 Philadelphia 76ers, or other teams like that would have a major advantage, because they have those all-time great bigs to take advantage of that matchup, and Detroit doesn't bolster that. Personally, this is just 2 highly emotional guys who are very emotionally attached to their teams and therefore really biased, making some ridiculous points and not giving each other enough respect. Today's list is a rather interesting one. I believe that I am objectively correct about this list, and there is no way I could possibly be wrong, simply because it's all based on personal preference. These were the top 6 most entertaining teams to me, based on a variety of aspects, like how exciting the highlights were, how intriguing the star power was, and how unique and fascinating their style of play was compared to the rest of NBA history. With that being said, these are just the teams that entertain me, so let me know what are your most entertaining teams in the comment section below. Number 6, the 2016 Golden State Warriors. To many people, the entertainment value of this squad hasn't aged as gracefully, because nowadays many people are exhausted by the rapid inflation of three-point shooting. I will say this though, I personally will never forget how mesmerizing the Warriors style and execution was back when I was seeing it in the 15-16 season. Steph was making over 400 three-pointers in a single season, at a time when no one else had even made 300. He was hitting shots from 30 feet and beyond with regularity and with a level of efficiency that we had never seen before in the history of the game. On top of that, the second best shooter in the entire league was his teammate.
Seeing their ball movement, the way they spread the floor, and the way they dominated the game with their perimeter shooting is something that the fans and analysts never thought was possible before they came along. Add on the fact that Draymond Green was a wild card of drama, and add on the fact that Steve Kerr was their head coach, which meant that he had a unique perspective in the comparisons between the 96 Bulls and the 16 Warriors, and what you had was a recipe for some must-see basketball. Number 5. The Lob City Supersonics. If the Chicago Bulls dynasty was the hottest ticket in the 1990s, then the Payton and Kemp Sonics were not far behind. Back then, the Seattle crowd always had an electric and energetic atmosphere, and much of that was influenced by the product on the court. That Seattle team loved to run the fast break, and with Gary Payton at the helm, you had one of the best facilitators and, more importantly, one of the best lob passers that the game of basketball had ever seen. On the receiving end was none other than Shawn Kemp, one of the most athletic and thunderous finishers that I've ever seen. It wasn't just their highlights though, but it was also their personalities. Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp were competitive showmen that had an energy level that matched their exuberant home crowd. What made the whole experience even better was the fact that Kevin Calabro was their play-by-play commentator throughout the 1990s. Nowadays, he does an excellent job for the Portland Trail Blazers local broadcasts, but I personally always preferred him with the Sonics, as he had the perfect voice and energy for the product that was on the court. Number 4. The 99-2000 Shaq and Kobe Lakers. Now, this personal choice has a lot to do with the uniqueness of this team. Phil Jackson was running the triangle offense, and in this system, Shaquille O'Neal was operating as its centerpiece. During the Diesel's prime MVP season, everybody in Los Angeles and on the opposing end of the court knew what the game plan was. The Lakers were going to feed O'Neal, and a collaboration of big men would try their best to stop him, and usually they failed miserably. In the history of me watching basketball, I've never seen a player demand as much defensive attention as Shaq did at that time. He was a freakish anomaly that you only get to experience once in a lifetime. And if that wasn't your cup of tea, they had this young and upcoming player named Kobe Bryant, who was the closest thing we had ever seen to Michael Jordan in terms of his style, his skill, his mentality, and even his body language. He was the lightning to Shaq's thunder, and whether you were rooting for them or against them, you had to appreciate the amazing dynamic of their all-time great tandem. Number 3. The 7-second Phoenix Suns. It's hard to communicate to a younger basketball fan just how unique the Mike D'Antoni and Steve Nash-led Suns were in the mid-2000s. You never hear them say it, but it appeared as if their mindset was that the best defense was double the offense. The tempo was always at a blistering speed, as they believed that the highest quality shot was the one that was taken within the first 7 seconds of the possession. The concept was way ahead of its time, but today it's completely normal in the modern NBA. In that era, they were basically the only team that was pulling up for transition threes basically every other play. It was a foreign concept, and many close-minded analysts claimed that an NBA team could never win a championship with that approach. Although that was true specifically in the case of this Suns team, that playstyle and approach would go on to win championships in the future. You had Steve Nash delivering mesmerizing passes like a basketball magician. You had the Matrix finishing in transition. You had Amari Stoudemire absolutely posterizing defenders out of the pick and roll. And you had an array of three-point snipers from one of the most offensively talented teams of that era. It was a joy to watch. Number 2. The 2014 San Antonio Spurs. This one probably isn't the most surprising pick, as the 13-14 Spurs are frequently documented as one of the most beautiful and intelligent brands of basketball of all time. The team's IQ was off the charts, as Greg Popovich was at the height of his coaching abilities, and basketball veterans like Tony Parker, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Boris Diaw, the execution was nearly flawless. Basically, every single player on that team was always looking to make the extra pass, as defenses were often struggling to keep up. It was the perfect blend of fundamentals, discipline, and analytics. Although most hardcore basketball fans appreciate this team today, it's a bit unfortunate that they weren't a bit more appreciated back then, as the quote, boring Spurs narrative was something that was still lingering amongst the casual fans. But for hardcore basketball fans like myself that absolutely love seeing the game played the right way with a fluent and selfless style, this Spurs team was the standard of excellence. Number 1. The Showtime Lakers. Now before you jump into the comments foaming at the mouth calling me biased, let me confirm for you, I am totally biased. I grew up watching this Lakers team over and over again on my dad's VHS tapes, and they were one of the major catalysts that led me to fall in love with the game of basketball. Sure, I look at these Showtime Lakers with rose-tinted glasses, but I think I'm still correct when I say that I haven't seen another team like them in the years since. Thanks to the brilliant split decision making of Magic Johnson, this Lakers team used to treat basketball games like a track meet. Typically, teams will run a fast break when they have the numbers advantage, but Los Angeles didn't even need that. They would simply grab the rebound and immediately push the tempo without a second thought, because they believed they could execute better when the pace was high, and better than the defense could defend it. With guys like James Worthy and Byron Scott as running mates, Magic was constantly delivering no-look passes for crowd-igniting slams. The stars were on the court, the stars were in the crowd, and the game's greatest showman with his exuberant character put on the greatest show in basketball. And if, for some reason, that exhilarating pace of play wasn't working, they would simply dump the ball down in the post to the captain and let him go to work with the most indefensible shot in basketball history, the skyhook. Their impact on the league is still felt to this day, as people continuously refer to transition highlights as Showtime. So what do you guys think? These are the teams that I enjoyed watching the most throughout the years. What are yours? I look forward to hearing your suggestions in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.